The movie begins with scenes of a mysterious alien flying through space in a spacesuit at the speed of light towards Earth to save his planet and landing somewhere in New Mexico. After crashing, the alien takes on a human form and, while naked, sneaks onto someone's property, prompting the owner to call the police. When the police arrive, they find a man with a water hose in his mouth, responding to questions with disjointed words in broken English. At the station, the man claims he is from another world on a mission, having just learned the language. He asks for water and then reads a name on an officer's patch, announcing his name is Faraday. Asked who can pick him up from the station, he names Justin Falls. Meanwhile, Justin is preparing for another shift at a toxic waste disposal facility. Once a promising scientist, she now takes care of her sick father and raises a young daughter. Receiving a call from the station, she goes there, but does not recognize the man. Faraday then starts quoting her scientific work and confesses he needs her for his mission. Puzzled but willing, she vouches for the strange man. They release him, and his first stop is a pawn shop, where he vomits a large amount of gold rings. After getting money, he buys an antique device to determine his next direction. Faraday stuffs the bills in his pockets, but fails to notice them flying away. Some guys in a passing car get out to rob him. Justin sees this and tries to help Faraday, but the robbers knock a weapon from her hands. Faraday then grabs the gun and fires randomly, scaring the thugs. Cursing herself, Justin puts Faraday in her car, and he speaks again about their joint mission, giving coordinates for a message reception. Needing money, she agrees. Soon they stop at a gas station where Faraday finds water containers and joyfully immerses himself into them. He then sees a horse corral and confuses Justin by saying that on his planet, horses are predators. On the road, they stop at a cafe where Justin tries teaching Faraday decent behavior, eventually labeling him autistic. Faraday then surprises her by writing a futuristic equation on a napkin taught by Thomas Newton, founder of World Enterprises. On Antea, Faraday's planet, two races exist: Newton's race, the knowers, who invent and manage, and Faraday's race, the drones, who obediently follow orders. They drive on, and Faraday reveals his world is dying, and Earth doesn't have much time left either. Tired of his seemingly delusional talk, Justin drops him off and leaves. Faraday walks towards his destination and soon sees a huge black cloud forming a tornado. Justin, also seeing this, turns back to find Faraday. When he finds himself in the eye of this storm, teleported to a forest where he meets Thomas Newton, who is also an alien from Antea. Newton has learned to create spaces only certain beings can enter. He warns Faraday to stay away, as agents are hunting him. In response, Faraday reproaches the teacher because all of Antea was waiting for his return with water. But time passed, and there were fewer and fewer Anteans left. They considered Newton a traitor and even decided to erase his name from memory. But Faraday believes him. Then Newton advises Faraday to introduce a virus into Antea, which he calls humans, and most importantly, to see everything through the eyes of a human, but not to get attached to earthly life. He sets Faraday a goal: reclaim the company taken from him, because there lies the key to salvation. But he will need Justin's help. Meanwhile, the woman tries to take shelter from the hurricane in her car. Suddenly, everything calms down, and she sees Faraday in front of the car, looking intimidating and repeating only one word: origin. Terrified, Justin drives away. Faraday sets off on foot and soon reaches the familiar cafe. The waitress recognizes him, offers water, and finds out for him that Origin is a corporation in Seattle. Meanwhile, CIA agent Clay receives a dinner invitation from his boss and foster mother Finch. He recently made a mistake resulting in a child's death, and now only success in a new case can save his job. Finch tells him about the strange tornado, which was actually a dialogue in the form of signals sent and received from space, something that last happened 40 years ago. Back then, Dr. Papel, who now lives in Alaska, was involved. Clay must go there and find out everything he can. At the same time, Faraday takes a taxi to the airport and, realizing he needs documents for the flight, steals them from the driver. But upon entering the terminal, he suddenly feels very ill. The radiation from the passenger and luggage scanning systems affect him. He vomits a large amount of water and loses consciousness. Justin is called by the police to pick up Faraday, who is now in her jurisdiction. She arrives to find him pleading to be taken to Seattle, as the tornado was a message. She finally believes he is an alien. Faraday explains that the Origin Corporation has blueprints for a device that can save Antea. As a nuclear fusion expert, she can help him build it. Justin takes Faraday home and introduces him to her family. He is baffled by why people keep useless old people instead of disposing of them. At home, Justin's father Josiah plays his favorite jazz, which delights Faraday. Meanwhile, CIA agent Clay makes his way to Alaska and finds PayPal's house, but he is immediately struck on the head and loses consciousness. The young man comes to, tied to a chair with his mouth taped shut. The mad old man cuts him to make sure he is human. PayPal is convinced the agent came for the film. He starts to recall Newton, whom he turned into a psychopath. Then, Clay manages to free himself, but the old man grabs a rifle and, threatening the agent, suddenly shoots himself. At the same time, Faraday, sitting at a table, watches the traditional prayer in confusion, not understanding who Josiah is talking to. Josiah regrets his daughter abandoning her scientific work. Faraday cannot understand why she wastes her potential on a worthless old man. An upset Justin takes her daughter to a neighbor. Faraday stays with Josiah. He looks at the old man and then reaches out to him. Justin sees flashing lights and runs to the house, finding Josiah standing on his feet while Faraday convulses in a corner, saying they can now go to Seattle. Father and daughter rush to him and find the alien completely dehydrated. They carry him to the bathroom where he drinks greedily. Then he suddenly falls. A black substance emerges from him, rises into the air, and disappears into the ventilation. After that, Faraday fully recovers. In the morning, Josiah, for the first time in years, gets himself ready and insists his daughter take Faraday to Seattle, gifting him a suit and a hat. On the road, Faraday explains they need to infiltrate the Origin Corporation's vault and find Newton's 10th project. The woman is skeptical, so Faraday asks to stop the car, approaches a long broken oil derrick, extracts a glowing sphere from himself, and inserts it into the machine's engine. The oil derrick starts working, and the alien explains that it is quantum synthesis, which can operate for hundreds of years. He used this energy to travel to Earth. Newton's project will provide the necessary energy, restore Antaea's core, and enable the recreation of water. Earth is currently on the same path, and Justin was very close to solving the mystery. Meanwhile, in Alaska, Clay finds an old projector and a film reel showing an experiment on Newton, where his face was removed. The shocked agent burns down the old psychiatrist's house. Faraday and Justin stop at a hotel for the night. The alien lies on the water in the pool, looking at the stars, and predicts Earth's imminent doom. Then, Justin sets a condition. She will help achieve the goal, but the device's blueprints must remain on Earth. Faraday agrees and informs her that they need to find Hutch. It turns out Hutch is the dismissed brother of the Origin Corporation's manager. However, seeing Faraday's calculations on a napkin and hearing Newton's name, he refuses to have anything to do with them. Clay meets with Finch. He has traced Newton's entire path. The US government practically stripped Newton, who amassed a fortune and founded Origin, of everything, replacing him with their own person while torturing the alien himself. Newton then disappeared after speaking about the project. Now, another similar entity has appeared. Finch reminds him of the case's danger, but agrees to assign him the investigation, providing him with an analyst, Elizabeth. At that moment, Hutch finally comes to Justin and Faraday. He recalls Newton's projects and tries to convey to the pair what will happen if quantum energy is used on Earth. It would mean the death of the entire energy system, the ruin of oligarchs, and the closure of power stations. Who would let them do such a thing? Clay meets Elizabeth, who intercepted the last signal. Her file states she betrayed her own family. She reminds him of the child who died because of him. Clay realizes they are a team and orders her to track down the alien from the tornado. Hutch informs them that Origin is in London, but his relationship with his sister is very poor. Faraday suggests a demonstration of his quantum prototype. Hutch arranges a private plane to London. However, during the flight, Faraday's face suddenly starts to melt. Hutch barely manages to calm the stewardess, who is in shock after witnessing it. They arrive and infiltrate a club where scientific proposals are being presented. Faraday listens to a young scientist's presentation, but suddenly goes to the board and writes the correct formula. When questioned by the committee, he announces he came to demonstrate quantum synthesis processes. Seeing disbelief, he takes at the sphere, and instantly, all of London's electricity cuts off and then turns back on. The next day, the news goes global. Justin asks her father to come to London with her daughter Molly. Hutch receives numerous congratulations. Faraday is outraged by Earthling's wastefulness and the fact that there is nothing about his teacher Newton on the internet, as if his life was simply erased. Hutch decides to go to his sister's estate uninvited. Elizabeth tracks them and reports to Clay, showing him Faraday's airport photo. She is sure he is an alien. She also obtained information about a Mary, who was Newton's friend. Clay heads to the monastery clinic where she works. Faraday's team arrives at Hutch's sister's estate. Justin talks about the prototype that can light a city for almost a year using just a liter of water. Edie opposes, but then Faraday mentions Newton's name. Edie's son admits he has music recorded by the scientist on an old device and leads Faraday to his grandfather's study. At the same time, Clay arrives at the monastery clinic and meets Mary. Meanwhile, Edie's consultants bombard Justin with questions, making her feel unwell. During this time, Faraday receives a musical sphere and upon playing it, hears strange sounds. In the monastery, Mary recalls that Newton told her about his wife and begs Clay to protect the alien, as he is a miracle. Faraday realizes that the sphere contains Newton's farewell to his wife. It is so touching that tears well up in the alien's eyes, although he does not know what they are, and he throws the sphere away. Antaeans understand each other, but do not feel. Faraday wonders how humans can live like this. Meanwhile, Clay visits Edie and reminds her that her father was a CIA front. Therefore, she will have to make a deal with Faraday, who will build the required machine. Edie finds herself having to agree, but in retaliation, she tells everyone that Justin killed her assistant in an attempt to unlock quantum energy. The young man received a lethal dose of radiation because she didn't wait for safety confirmation. However, Faraday declares that he will work only with Justin. Edie is forced to sign the agreement. Justin admits that the deceased young man was the father of her daughter, Molly. Later, Faraday recalls saying goodbye to his family, his wife, and 2 children, and promising to return. He urges Justin to hurry, but she is determined to first bring her family here. Hutch and Faraday arrive at the research center, where all materials related to Newton's project are brought. Simultaneously, Clay's team sets up their laboratory, where they can monitor Faraday's work. He has become a real Steve Jobs, demanding high results from employees. Soon, his team creates a construction that will shield the device from electromagnetic fields. Immediately, all of Clay's equipment shuts down. Faraday suddenly realizes something is wrong. Newton planned to obtain energy from tritium, but its decay period is too short. It seems Newton was creating nonsense. Faraday simply won't have time to save the planet. While pondering this, an elderly lady suddenly addresses him, confessing she worked with Newton. Her name is Watt, and she is ready to help Faraday. Meanwhile, Justin brings her family to London and arrives at the laboratory to organize things. Josiah suddenly starts noticing changes in himself. He foresees an accident and pulls his granddaughter Molly off the road in time. In the evening, Faraday admits he is getting nowhere. He finds more and more differences between Antaea and Earth. Here, people rarely follow instructions. He leaves the house, remembering his planet and flight, and again encounters Watt. She leads him somewhere, confessing she knows he is a drone. Josiah gives his daughter the materials he saved from her work. Watt tells Faraday that Earth and Antaea once collided in space, after which Earth absorbed part of Antaea, but Antaea also received a piece of Earth, awakening the human within some Antaeans. The pair heads to the laboratory, where Watt reminds him of Newton's words about the virus, humans, which drone Faraday did not hear. Therefore, his children are dying now. Angered, Faraday pushes the woman away, and she starts destroying everything around. Elizabeth, watching all of this, is puzzled, as Faraday is absolutely alone in this laboratory. Then, the alien realizes the woman is just his imagination, suggesting what to do next. He goes to Justin because he has deciphered the project. Justin shows him her equation, where she replaced tritium with another substance. Friends, the continuation of the story is now before you on the screen. In the remote forests of Washington state, a young man tracks and kills a deer. Children of various ages, smeared with black soot, emerge from the forest accompanied by their father, Ben Cash, who announces,
"Today the boy is dead, and in his place is a man."
He then feeds the hunter the liver of the freshly killed animal. The children look proudly at their brother and then joyfully splash in the clear waters of a forest stream, washing off their camouflage. Later they carry the animal's carcass to their home, nestled deep in the forest. Nearby there's a greenhouse and outbuildings for storage, with a garden surrounding them. Inside everything is tidy and organized, with each forest home resident diligently performing their tasks. Later they gather in a clearing where after meditation, the father teaches the children self-defense techniques.
You kill her.
Yeah, thank you. Let's try that.
In the evening, the family gathers around a campfire where the children read world classics and scientific literature. The father questions each child about the material, helping them understand everything from advanced mathematics to literary styles, and gives them assignments for the next day. Then he takes out a guitar. Everyone brings their instrument, and soon an improvised melody plays by the campfire, under which the children dance. In the morning, the family goes for their mandatory run along forest trails. Everything seems to follow a well-established routine. Later, the father and his eldest son, Bo, return from a trip to the nearest town for supplies. Unexpectedly, the younger children ask,
"Why does Mommy have to be gone so long?"
She hasn't been gone very long.
It turns out their mother is in a hospital, and the father is going to find out when she can return home. In town, while Ben shops, local girls flirt with Bo. However, he doesn't know what to talk about with them, as his knowledge of political structures doesn't interest them much. So Bo goes to get the mail and finds several letters addressed to him, inviting him to the country's best universities. Meanwhile, Ben reaches his sister, who informs him that his wife Leslie has taken her own life. Returning home, he sits under a forest waterfall for a long time before coming out to the children to announce the tragic news.
Last night, Mommy killed herself.
While everyone weeps, Ben's middle son, Relian, grabs a knife and tries to attack his father, but then directs his blows at a tree, venting his anger. Later, Ben reads his wife's found will, amazed by it. But morning comes, and the family again runs along the forest trail and exercises in the clearing. Suddenly, Relian asks,
"Dad, when's Mom's funeral?"
Ben returns to town and contacts his wife's parents, who blame everything on their former son-in-law, even though they chose this life together. When Leslie got sick, her parents found and paid for the clinic, but nothing helped.
I found her will.
You are not welcome here. I will have you arrested.
However, Leslie's mother informs him that the burial will take place in 5 days. Later, the family discusses what happened. The children understand their grandparents' anger, but cannot allow their mother's will to be disregarded. However, the threat of their father being arrested and them being sent to an orphanage scares them. At night, Ben hears his wife's voice.
What we're doing out here is so incredible. I love you so much.
In the morning, Ben finds all 6 children ready in the yard, wanting to see their mother one last time. He strongly opposes the trip, but the children insist.
Dad, give us the mission.
Mission, rescue Mom!
But Ben reminds them of the upcoming training. Struggling, Relian falls off the cliff and injures his arm, but the father reminds him,
No one will magically appear and save you in the end.
the children persistently conquer the difficult peak as it starts to rain. Later, they rest at the base of the cliff. On the way home, the father suddenly stops the bus and admits that they cannot go to their mother's funeral because they cannot argue with her relatives. But suddenly, Ben stops his speech and turns on the music.
They set off
Into the big world in their converted bus. Along the way, Ben gives the children a unique tour, showing them America's sights.
Attention all campers. This is your captain speaking.
Later, Ben orders them to search for any game for dinner.
Everyone keep their eyes peeled for deer.
Finding nothing suitable, the family stops for the night. In the morning, they arrive at a bank, and while Ben withdraws money, the children look around in surprise.
What's wrong with everyone?
Are they sick?
Convincing the children that laughing at people is wrong, Ben tells them to return to the bus. Soon, a police officer stops them and asks for documents. Checking the license, he inquires,
No school today.
and goes to inspect the bus. The situation is saved by Bo, who starts reading religious texts and says they are homeschooled. The children sing hymns and the officer hurries away. The bus continues on, but soon they stop to hunt for food. However, the children cannot shoot at domestic animals. The bus drives on. Suddenly, the children start crying, remembering their mother. The girls speak to each other in Esperanto, which angers their father.
No Esperanto. I'm not joking.
The children start communicating in world languages. Soon, Ben has to stop at a cafe, but the menu confuses her.
Cola.
Poison water.
Realizing there is no proper food here, Ben orders the children to leave. He goes to a supermarket and fills the cart with groceries. Suddenly, he grabs his chest and falls to the floor. While concerned shoppers try to help him, the children steal the groceries. Ben regains consciousness and leaves the store. Driving a bit further, the father reviews their actions, and the children analyze the mistakes made during the theft in detail. Finally, Ben presents a stolen cake, as today is the birthday of scientist Chomsky.
Uncle, no, it's the day of your birthday.
After the treat, the father gives all the children useful gifts: a bow, knives, a book on sex education, and arrows. But this angers Relian.
Why can't we celebrate Christmas like the rest of the entire world?
The father doesn't understand why a mythical elf is more useful than a thinker and humanist. He offers his son to share his thoughts and convince him of the correctness of his reasoning. But the boy leaves. The family moves on. Soon they reach Ben's sister Harper's house. The woman is happy to see all her nephews, but their questions surprise her.
How did you kill those chickens? With an axe or a knife?
She tries to find answers and is again astonished that Ben honestly and thoroughly explains even very delicate matters to the children. Harper's husband tries to offer condolences, but Ben calmly reminds him that he couldn't stand his wife. Then he straightforwardly explains the cause of his wife's death. His sister and her husband try to end the conversation. Children shouldn't know the details, but Ben tells the children the real cause of their mother's death.
Probably a form of postpartum psychosis.
Ignoring his sister, who left the table, he pours wine for the children. Later, the children watch with curiosity as their cousins play video games. Ben argues with his sister, who cannot accept such democracy in parenting.
I tell the truth to my kids. I don't lie to my kids.
Protecting children.
Harper believes that not sharing what children cannot understand isn't a lie. Her husband suggests postponing the conversation until morning, and Ben apologizes. Meanwhile, the children take their sleeping bags and set up for the night in the yard, despite having rooms prepared for them. In the morning, everyone gathers at the table, and Ben allows the children to play video games with their cousins. When the children leave, his sister and her husband try to reason with
Kids need structure. They need to go to a real school.
Then Ben calls his nephews and asks them questions about political science and history. The boys can't answer a single question. However, Ben's youngest daughter freely discusses these topics. Relatives are impressed by such knowledge and no longer object to Ben's way of educating his children. The family moves on. They soon stop to rest at a campground where Bo meets a girl. She is surprised by his unusual name, and he explains that his parents made it up.
I'm Claire.
Bodevin. Our names are unique. There's only one of us in the whole world.
In the evening, they continue their acquaintance. The girl is surprised that Bo doesn't know modern pop music but loves Bach and cello suites. He lies that they recently lived in Paris and is amazed at her ignorance. He avoids questions about his mother and, after kissing the girl for the first time, declares his intention to marry her to her mother.
I am ready for you, if you will have me. Will you be my wife?
The mother leads the girl back to the trailer. In the morning, the bus pulls out of the parking lot and Bo waves to the girl and her mother. That day, they reach the church where Leslie's farewell ceremony is held. Relatives and friends mourn the woman when a group in bright clothes enters the church, stunning everyone. The preacher tells about Leslie, and when he mentions her husband, Ben takes the floor and reads his wife's will.
First of all, Leslie practiced Buddhism.
If nothing else, she had a sense of humor.
Leslie's last will and testament.
Finally, she asks to have her ashes flushed down the nearest toilet. Enraged, Leslie's father Jack orders Ben to be thrown out of the church. The children run after him while the preacher continues his sermon. Soon, Leslie's coffin is carried outside. Grandma and Grandpa hug the grandchildren, some of whom they see for the first time. Nevertheless, Jack forbids Ben to go to the cemetery, threatening arrest. Ben orders the children to get in the bus and follows the procession, though the children beg him to stop.
No, I don't want to lose you!
Hearing the last argument, Ben stops the bus. They drive to the suburbs and stop for the night. The man opens a bottle of wine and drinks it, sitting by the bus while his sons go to a sports field and remember their mother. Unexpectedly, Relian declares,
Mom had psychotic episodes. Dad made her crazy. Dad's dangerous.
Upset, Bo returns to Ben and shows him letters from all the universities in America, offering to accept him for study. Suddenly, the father accuses him of lying and secrecy, and Bo confesses, "It was Mom. I just want to go to college." Ben is stunned, knowing his son speaks 6 languages, advanced mathematics, and physics. What else can he be taught? But the son becomes furious.
I don't know anything about anything!
Later, he receives a note from his youngest son, who ran away to live with his grandparents. Seeing his father come for him, Relian accuses him of killing his mother.
You killed Mom! I heard you fighting about where we live. Mom wanted to leave.
Ben tries to prove to his son that they made the decision together with Leslie, but the boy is determined to stay with his grandparents. Ben orders him to pack, but the boy shouts insults and runs away. Ben follows, but an arrow lands right next to him. This is Jack stopping his son-in-law.
They're going to be totally unprepared for the real world.
Jack intends to file for custody of the children. Ben refuses to leave without his son, and then Jack calls the police. Ben has to leave. Later, he and the children hide in the dark, watching the grandfather's house. Then they send Vesper to rescue the captive. Unexpectedly, the daughter falls from the roof and crashes. A shocked Ben can't believe it happened. The girl is taken to the hospital. A vertebra is fractured. The doctor is very impressed by her physical condition, but the girl was very lucky. In the morning, Ben brings the children to Leslie's parents' house. He watches them interact with their grandfather. Her mother shows the last letters from her daughter.
We created a paradise out of Plato's Republic. I'm going to get better out here. I know I will.
Later, Ben tells the children they will stay here, but this causes outrage because this house is the opposite of everything he taught them. However, the father, frightened by Vesper's injury, realizes that his entire life was a beautiful mistake.
It was too much, and I knew it. I'll ruin your lives.
Ben unloads the children's belongings from the bus and says goodbye to Jack. He promises to arrange the children's lives in the best way. The man drives away. Sitting behind the wheel, he cries, looking at the empty cabin. Reaching a gas station restroom, he shaves off his long-standing beard. At night, he stops by the roadside, lights a campfire, and suddenly hears a voice.
Shaved your face.
And his children emerge from the bus, having hidden in the luggage compartment. The children want to save their mother and complete the mission, and the father gives in. The family goes to the cemetery and digs up Leslie's coffin, restoring the grave so no one notices the theft. Later, Bo shaves his hair and beard, earning his father's approving smile. Soon the family takes Leslie's coffin to the seaside, where the children build a funeral pyre for her, and after saying their goodbyes, light it under their mother's favorite song. Everyone sings and dances, fulfilling her last wish. Sometime later, they go to the airport to see off Bo, who is flying to Namibia for volunteer work, and also flush their mother's ashes down the toilet according to her will. The father gives his son final advice.
Always tell the truth. Always take the high road. Don't die.
I won't.
Later, the family settles on a farm, raising chickens in their bus. Ben tends to the farm and the children start going to school. The film ends here. Czech astrophysicist Jakob wakes up in his ship thousands of miles from Earth. His day starts with a call from the flight curator and close friend Peter. Today, the people of Earth want to communicate with the hero. The head of the Czech space program, Tuma, greets the brave pilot as he has been on a solo flight for 189 days already. The thing is, for 4 years, a mysterious cosmic phenomenon, which has been named Chopra's Cloud, has been observed from Earth. To study its origin and composition, Jakob was sent to Jupiter. In just a few days, he will be able to take samples, which may help unravel the mysteries of the universe. The captain is asked questions, and suddenly a girl sympathizes with him, as he is the loneliest person in the universe. But Jakob assures her that it is not so. Yes, he is 500 million kilometers away from Earth, but nearly half the distance has been covered, and he will soon return home. Moreover, his beloved wife Lenka constantly supports him, with whom he is in direct contact through the latest quantum communication system, which is faster than the speed of light. So Jakob does not suffer from loneliness. TV takes a commercial break where a cheerful Jakob praises the products of a generous sponsor. But the astronaut immediately frowns, and it becomes clear that he is a tired man who has not slept for a long time. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka records a message to her husband, apologizing for leaving him because she is not needed by him. But the flight curator stops the file from being sent and passes it to Tuma. On the ship, Jakob repairs the toilet again, grumbling at Peter. But the latter is more concerned about the malfunctioning cameras. He also notices the astronaut's tired look and advises him to get some sleep. Jakob asks to contact Lenka because she somehow does not respond to his calls, and he promises to find out the reason. The man begins training when Tuma reviews his wife's message. The woman sincerely worries for the family and does not intend to pass this message to Jakob. Lenka is packing her things at this time and does not respond to her husband's messages. Distressed, Jakob drowns his sorrows in sweets and tries to sleep, watching the approaching Chopra's cloud. At night, noises from the malfunctioning toilet keep him from sleeping. He gets up unrested and even more tired, and looking at himself in the mirror, suddenly notices strange movement under his skin and tentacles protrude from his mouth. Jakob is horrified, trying to pull something out of himself, and wakes up. He starts the day on the treadmill, then prepares to equip the apparatus for sample collection. Half of the ship's cameras are out of order, and no one understands why. The thought of Lenka, who still does not make contact, disturbs him. And one day Jakob suddenly hears an unfamiliar voice offering help, but Peter hears nothing of the sort. True, there is a chance that Jakob intercepted the transmission of the Korean mission, which started after the Czech one, but the language was not Korean at all. Later, the friend informs that Lenka went to her mother's, so she will contact her husband when she returns. Jakob calms down a bit and continues his work. He inspects the compartments and suddenly sees a huge hairy spider in one of them. He closes the doors to the compartment and contacts Peter, but precisely in this part of the station, the camera has long been broken and he can see nothing. Jakob opens the doors, but the spider has not gone anywhere. Moreover, it starts a conversation, stating that it did not intend to scare the human. Then the astronaut locks himself in the airlock and informs Peter that he wants to decontaminate the ship. He gets into a spacesuit, says the password that triggers the system, and the surrounding space is filled with disinfecting foam, the color of which reminds him of a summer morning in the field where he and Lenka walked. But then the cleaning is over and Jakob emerges from the airlock. However, the spider hasn't gone anywhere. It informs him that the strange bath arranged for it by the human did not harm it and suggests removing the spacesuit. It is not dangerous. Jakob reaches out to it, but the spider dodges. Such is not the custom in its tribe, so it's better for the human not to do this. It is an explorer too who accidentally found Earth. It studied life on the planet for 3,158 years and even learned Earth's languages, but never understood the essence of the human soul. And when it met Jakob, it felt his loneliness and came here. Unable to accept what was happening, the astronaut hides in the sleeping compartment, but he immediately starts to vividly see and hear his wife. Jakob moves to the station's room, where Lenka appears before him again. It turns out the spider is broadcasting the human's memories because it is very interested in these strange feelings. And it wants to help him overcome emotional difficulties since his companion is leaving. Jakob tries to refuse the help, but the spider does not believe him. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka arrives at her mother's because she is pregnant and cannot be alone. Nearby is a boarding house where pregnant women live together, and she decides to stay there for a while. The mother does not understand her, as one cannot leave her husband right now. At the station, the spider asks the astronaut to give it some of his food, and he treats it to nut paste, the taste of which reminds it of its lost home. Its planet was destroyed by an enemy attack, and it fled and wandered through space for a long time. At this time on Earth, Tuma goes to Lenka. The woman is convinced that the wife cannot leave her husband right now. After all, she knew he was a very peculiar person. These qualities help him stay alone for many days, but Lenka is pregnant and suffers from loneliness. The spider tells the astronaut that Chopra's cloud consists of particles that contain wisdom. It cannot say how old it is, but everything has a beginning and an end, even the universe. The spider shows Jakob his first date with Lenka when she suggested they always follow each other, and he agreed. And he does not understand why make promises that you cannot keep, but Jakob has no answer. Later, he asks the spider to save some nut paste, and it reluctantly gives back the can. At this time on Earth, Lenka confesses to her mother that, although it is hard to raise a child alone, she is ready for it. And she will tell her daughter that she loved her father very much at first, but was mistaken. And at the station, Jakob suddenly wonders about the spider's name and suggests naming the creature Hanus. His father told him about a master who lived in ancient times, who created astronomical clocks, for which the king ordered him to be blinded. The spider agrees to accept this name. Later, the astronaut plays music from the opera Mermaid and explains what it is. The spider immediately demonstrates his date with his wife when she appeared before him in a Naiad costume, but the man does not want to remember this. At night, Jakob again has nightmares, this time related to his father, who was a communist and died because of his beliefs. But the spider comforts its friend. There is no need to worry about the past, as the universe is as it should be. Later, Hannes watches in surprise as Jakob exercises, and Jakob explains that humans must do this in space, otherwise their limbs could fail. Hannes doesn't understand why leave the home planet then. At this time, Tuma visits Lenka. The woman tries to reach out to the wife's feelings, but she does not want to return to the past. Then the head says she will not pass her message, and the whole point of the silence surrounding their talks is that inside they are together. Meanwhile, there are only 45 hours left to reach the cloud. And then Lenka's voice spreads through the station. Jakob rushes to the transmitter and sees his wife's face on the screen. They talk about the past and the future when he sees a glowing particle in front of him, which Hannes calls the beginning. Jakob tries to catch it in a jar, but the particle freely passes through all surfaces. Suddenly, the ship loses all communication, and then Chopra's particles start swirling everywhere. Hannes calms the human. The beginning will not harm him, so there is no need to fear. It is a regular repository that cannot be described in human language. And then it asks why the arrival of a child so upsets Lenka. Because her feelings smell of fear. Jakob explains that they lost their first child, and he was not there then, nor now. For what? The spider shows Jakob their conversation when he promised to be there, but he lied to his wife, and she stopped believing him. Later, Jakob finally gets through to Peter on the quantum phone, but Hannes again turns on the man's memories, where he and his wife discuss his journey. He was so confident that he didn't even try to understand his wife. The spider realized that Jakob is selfish, and he is to blame for his loneliness. So it lost interest in him and wants to leave. This causes a panic attack in the astronaut, who no longer wants to be alone. Jakob tries to grab the spider, but it itself presses the man's body to the bulkhead and reminds him that it preferred to communicate without touching. The spider lets the human go and flies to the other end of the station. Jakob desperately follows it, promising to change, and again sees Lenka in the guise of a naiad. He floats in zero gravity, remembering his wife and crying from the sense of realizing the loss. Then he calls Peter and asks him to visit the woman. The friend goes to the boarding house and hands her the quantum phone. Jakob talks about how he loves her and asks for forgiveness for his selfishness. Now he doesn't understand why he neglected the most precious. He wasted his life on nonsense and is not worthy of her. Immediately after the conversation, he hears Hannes' voice again, asking him to rest because he has atoned for his guilt. Jakob asks not to leave him, and the spider admits that it too fears loneliness. But suddenly the man notices that the spider is not feeling well, and it admits that although it escaped from the enemy, it was already too late. They had taken over his body, and suddenly it hugs the astronaut. For the first time in a long time, Jakob falls asleep deeply, and the spider has to wake him up because a great discovery awaits him. It even brings him a tube of hot coffee to bed, after which the astronaut makes the final preparations. He contacts the Czech Space Authority and reports that his mission is dedicated to all the people of Earth, but especially to Lenka. Afterward, he reduces speed and begins collecting samples using special equipment. But then the spider becomes very ill. Jakob abandons his task and tries to help his friend. The equipment gives an error, and Earth commands to cancel the sample collection. But Jakob hears nothing because he sees Hannes in open space. The ship's systems fail one after another, and the control center orders to end the mission and return. But Jakob puts on a spacesuit, takes a bomb, and goes outside. Peter can't understand what's happening and pleads with his friend to return to the ship. However, using the explosion to catch up with the spider, Jakob holds it. Hannes thanks him, but it's all in vain. Soon the enemies will consume him, and Jakob, looking at the surrounding space, remembers the day he almost drowned. Then his father saved him, and now he forgives all his father's sins, and forgives himself. Hannes pulls him to the center of the cloud, where everything is gathered, the beginning and the end, the fluctuation of all times, his past and future, him, his Lenka, and his father. Every promise and punishment, everything is unchangeable and impermanent, but such is the truth of nature. The universe is as it should be. Before the man, Lenka appears again, and Jakob admits that their meeting is a miracle. Just like the meeting with the spider. Jakob hands his friend a can of nut paste he saved for him. The latter thanks him and asks to listen to the silence, after which it disintegrates into millions of particles, consumed by worm-like creatures that destroyed his race. And Lenka on Earth suddenly sees a glowing purple particle in the grass. Night turns into day. Jakob in a spacesuit wades through a transparent stream, above which, on a log, sits Lenka in a mermaid costume asking him to kiss her. Her face becomes the last thing he sees, at least for a moment, because at that time, he sees the lights of a South Korean ship which saves Jakob. Later, he calls his wife Lenka, apologizes, and confesses that if he had known everything earlier, he would never have left, and she would kiss him once more. A fantastic, yet lifelike film. A work-absorbed astronaut had to be millions of kilometers away from his wife and hear a sermon from an extraterrestrial being to understand that family is the most important thing in his life, and one can only hope that he will manage to regain his sense of purpose. The year is 4032. Most of humanity has mutated into new creatures called abbeys. In the 21st century, Professor David Pilcher foresaw an unknown mutation in human DNA and built the town of Wayward Pines, which was meant to serve as an ark for the last surviving humans. The chosen ones, those who were destined to restore the human population, were frozen without their consent for 2,000 years. However, upon awakening, not everyone was pleased with life in a city surrounded by a tall fence with millions of monsters lurking outside. Dr. Theo Yedlin is on vacation at the beach. In a bar, he strikes up a conversation with a stranger who, at first glance, doesn't raise any suspicion. But the casual chat ends strangely. Yedlin wakes up several years later to find himself in the town of Wayward Pines. On his way to the hospital, accompanied by a group of strangers, Theo manages to escape. He seeks help at the first house he finds, hoping to call the police, but as he observes the strange behavior of the homeowners, Theo begins to doubt if he's doing the right thing. The police do respond to Yedlin's call, but instead of offering help, they return him to the hands of the strangers. They take Theo to the hospital, and after telling him a story about a government experiment, the people in black ask him to work for the good of society. The kidnappers ask Theo to save a patient who is extremely important to them. After examining the girl, Yedlin promises to do everything possible and instructs them to prepare the operating room while he assesses the seriousness of her injuries. Theo's patient turns out to be Kate. While the doctor operates on the girl, Carrie reports to Jason about losses within the ranks of the first generation. Looking at a photo of his rival, the dictator realizes that as long as Ben is free, their movement in the city are in danger. This is confirmed by Megan, who appears in the room. She reminds him of Pilcher's main rule: clear laws, strict punishment. Theo visits his patient, and she tries to tell him what's really going on. But Carrie doesn't allow the doctor to listen to Kate and instead urges him to take a break. While walking through the town, Theo witnesses soldiers separating a woman from her young son. The doctor tries to intervene but is once again prevented from understanding what's going on and is forced to walk away. However, later Yedlin does learn the woman's fate. She is brought to the central square along with others, accused of rebellion. Jason addresses the cheering crowd, assuring everyone that his cruelty is the path to humanity's salvation. After these words, he executes the woman without any explanation. Megan visits Kate in the hospital room and suggests they unite for the future of Wayward Pines. But Kate attacks her rival, armed with a scalpel. Kate confesses that she will never watch as dictators destroy the world. She raises the scalpel and ends her suffering. Mario brings Theo and other prisoners to the wall. He opens a passage and, after jamming the gas pedal with a rock, sends the vehicle into the lair of the abbeys. The monsters notice the prey but run past, trying to climb over the fence. Members of the First Generation movement watch a motivational video left for them by Pilcher, followed by footage from surveillance cameras showing the abbeys attempting to breach the wall. The creatures sacrifice themselves to create a ramp, allowing their comrades to infiltrate Wayward Pines. Jason realizes something is wrong and orders a squad to gather and check the situation in person. Meanwhile, the prisoners, led by Ben, try to escape from the vehicle, taking advantage of the fact that the monsters are ignoring them. Military vehicles approach the wall and soldiers open fire on the abbeys. But despite this, some creatures manage to leap over the barrier and engage in open combat. The first to be injured is Carrie. An abbey slashes open her stomach, and Jason is forced to leave his subordinates to take his companion to the hospital. Very soon, the leader regrets his decision to get rid of Theo. No one is capable of performing the complex surgery and saving the girl. Jason orders the doctor to be found, and several vehicles must drive beyond the wall. Without resisting, Theo jumps into one of them to avoid falling into the hands of the advancing mutants. The leader of the movement asks Yedlin to perform the operation, but Theo refuses to proceed without an explanation of what's going on. Jason is forced to strike a deal with the doctor, promising to return his wife and revealing that aside from Wayward Pines, there are no other humans. The rest of the planet is overrun by Abbeys. After the surgery, Carrie regains consciousness. Another problem for the town arises: depleted supplies. Jason asks CJ to prepare for the harvest, which is beyond the wall, but the town must prepare carefully for the encounter with the Abbeys. Theo has to come to terms with his new role. He is appointed the head and most likely the only doctor in Wayward Pines. The only thing he disagrees with is the portrait of Pilcher hanging on the wall of his new office. Megan gives a lecture for the teenagers, using an Abbey body to show the mutants' weak points. One of the students admits he knows about the attempted breach, but Megan assures him that the only danger to the town is the rebels. Everything else is under control of the authorities. After examining one of the teenagers, Theo informs Jason of serious issues. Due to the food shortage, the health of the residents is at risk. However, the young dictator doesn't appreciate the doctor's tone or his attempts to change the order in Wayward Pines. CJ prepares a team for the harvest. He suggests using fire as protection against the Abbeys, and after a brief briefing, the vehicles drive beyond the wall to bring back the harvest and save the town. The monsters attack immediately as the harvesters appear, but CJ's plan works. The fire scares off the Abbeys, and the group has some time to gather food. One of the soldiers unexpectedly encounters Ben, but the young man refuses to help his old friend, fearing severe punishment for associating with a rebel. The loaded vehicles leave, and Ben doesn't manage to pass through the open gates. He then stands in front of the camera and addresses Jason, stating that all of the leader's actions are the wrong choice in tyranny. Rumors that Ben is still alive reach his mother. Teresa tries to find out details from the soldiers and persuade them to return for the boy, but no one wants to deal with the troublemakers. Ben continues to hide in the danger zone, hoping to return to Wayward Pines, but a pack of Abbeys attacks the boy, turning him into a hearty meal. Jason checks the cameras and notices that there are no Abbeys in any of the sectors. The leader celebrates, believing he has driven the monsters out and that the town is now completely safe. But it seems the mutants have a different opinion. Several soldiers are sent on a reconnaissance mission, but they spot nothing except a frightened deer. This pleases Jason greatly, as he is convinced the Abbeys have left, but Carrie sees an unpleasant side to this. If Ben isn't found, the leader will have to answer to the town for the death of one of the first generation. At night, voices are heard in Jason's house, and, loading his weapon, the young man goes downstairs. To his surprise, Pam appears before him. The old woman reminds her protege of everything she taught him. She confesses that she killed her brother only because he tried to save the town through dictatorship and violence. Pam asks Jason to let her stay and help him build a truly bright future and save humanity. Jason agrees to forgive the traitor and takes her to the square to announce his decision to the town. Unbeknownst to Jason, Pam sneaks into the lab where the captured Abbeys are kept. Megan arrives shortly after, but the thief manages to leave without revealing her intentions for coming there. Back at home, Pam plans to use a drug she stole from the lab. Her plan is interrupted by Theo's arrival, but the nurse quickly directs him to the door to get what she came for in the hated town. Megan learns of the stolen drug, but it turns out it wasn't a medicine. Pam had taken a smallpox sample. Meanwhile, Pam attends a meeting in Jason's office. She unexpectedly kisses her protege in a way she never had before and joins the conversation. Dr. Yedlin bursts into the room. He orders everyone to leave without touching anything and avoiding contact with people. The doctor then reveals Pam's plans, and the woman doesn't even attempt to resist. Pam admits that, in her opinion, Wayward Pines should be destroyed. She asks Jason to put an end to the story, but the leader orders the traitor to be arrested. At night, Jason goes on a walk with Pam. He asks his mentor to tell him the end of the story about Wayward Pines, but after receiving an answer that wounds his pride, the dictator kills the old woman. A few days after the Abbey attack, Xander finally wakes up at the bottom of a deep well. There, the young man is found by a mutant, but he manages to defeat the monster and climb to the surface. At a meeting on the problems of Wayward Pines, CJ discusses the need to increase the area of crops. The population is growing, but food is becoming scarcer. Carrie and Megan believe it's too early to address this issue, but Jason supports the farmer and allows him to search for new fields. Xander is quietly approached by a man with a knife. He demands that Xander reveal who sent him and who currently rules the town. The savage himself says he has been here for a very long time. He is the only one from the team Pilcher sent to search for other survivors. Guards notice movement near the wall, and a duty squad is dispatched to the scene. The soldiers recognize Xander, accompanied by the stranger, but let them inside without question. The savage is immediately sent to Dr. Yedlin. Theo tries to find out from the patient if there are other people beyond the wall, but the man only says that the Abbeys are not the enemy. They are the replacement meant to take their place. Jason learns the name of the savage, Adam Hassler. He asks the doctor to tell him everything the patient said, but Theo refuses to disclose the confidential information and suggests the leader speak to the survivor personally. Throughout this time, Hassler struggles to recover. He is constantly haunted by nightmares of Abbey attacks he endured during his months beyond the wall. Finally, the man can no longer take it and decides to leave the hospital, fearing that the mutants will get to him there. The savage escapes into the streets, frightening crowds of townspeople. His hallucinations, in which mutants attack him, intensify, forcing him to find shelter in a deserted alley. There, Adam is discovered by Teresa. She recognizes an old acquaintance and tries to find out if he has seen Ben, but the savage hesitates to tell the woman the truth. Theo tells his wife about Adam's words, and Rebecca urges him to inform the town's leadership. The town sends off the first group, who go in search of new lands suitable for settlement and cultivation. Teresa stops CJ's vehicle and asks to join the mission so she can find her son. Hassler also joins the soldiers, having failed to adjust to the peaceful life in town. CJ gazes with excitement at the landscape he hasn't seen in a very long time. He orders the squad to set up camp and prepares for a night outside the wall. Adam leaves without explanation, but later that night he returns, causing a stir in the camp. Hearing the commotion, Rachel wakes up and the soldiers part to reveal what the savage has brought. On the ground lies a covered body, and even before she removes the covering, it becomes clear that Ben is underneath it. Rebecca brings Lucy, the girl she's trying to protect from the harsh rules of Wayward Pines, into her home. Upon learning that the girl is to be placed in the breeding program, Theo becomes furious and supports his wife's decision. Frank, Lucy's brother, feels responsible for her rule-breaking. He escapes from the academy and goes for an evening walk, but in the city center he faces a greater shock, and Abby appears on the town's carousel. The mutant stands tall before the boy, and this is caught on surveillance cameras. Jason orders the main streets to be cordoned off and makes sure no one finds out what's happening. Several armed men come to the boy's aid, but Carrie asks the leader not to destroy this creature. It is the first female Abby they have encountered. Despite attempts to keep the incident a secret, Frank becomes a school hero. Megan studies the new creature and reports to the leadership about the behavioral differences. According to the scientist, the female is much calmer than her counterparts, and the other captive Abbeys have also become more peaceful since her arrival. The doctor also shows the Abby's palm. It bears a strange pattern, unlike any scars. Megan believes this pattern might help them learn more about the mutants and eventually eradicate them. A search of the city yields no results. No other creatures are found, nor are there any breaches in the wall. No one can explain how the female managed to enter the city or why she did so. The only explanation that comes to Jason's mind is that the Abbeys may have accomplices among the population. Jason turns to Rebecca for help. She designed the city and may know the way the Abbey got inside. Upon learning that a new Abbey has appeared in the lab, Theo requests access to the research. Carrie agrees, but she warns the doctor that not all group members will like this. Naturally, Carrie is referring to Megan. The scientist makes every effort to appear satisfied with the doctor's presence, but she disobeys all of Yedlin's orders and conducts experiments that could harm the mutant. The Abbeys have quickly learned the lesson with fire. After making torches, they surround the cornfield and set it ablaze. The creature in the lab at that moment feels everything that is happening to its pack. Several years before the current events, unaware that a human invasion is imminent, the Abbey tribe enjoys a peaceful life deep in the forest. But suddenly a helicopter appears over the mutants' camp, and most of the tribe is wiped out. Only a few survive, with no other choice but to seek revenge. In the city, a siren blares, and panic begins. At the same time, the Abbeys set another field on fire, knowing that by doing this, they are depriving humans of any chance of survival. Adam is the first to notice the mutants approaching. He raises the alarm and orders the squad to move to a safe place, but it's already too late. The first creatures infiltrate the camp, and one of them attacks Teresa. Megan, unaware of anything, works on reports in the lab. She is only distracted when the Abbeys start banging on their cages, and the close proximity no longer feels safe. Theo learns that the food fields are burning. At that moment, Carrie arrives and asks the doctor to return to the hospital and prepare for a difficult night. Jason sends out several dozen vehicles, all civilian men, or to extinguish the fields, while the military protects them from Abbey attacks. Realizing how this will end, Theo orders his colleagues to prepare all available beds and be ready to receive not tens but hundreds of patients. The battlefield truly becomes a nightmare. The Abbeys are far more clever and resourceful. There's no one left to extinguish the fields. Soldiers fall before they can even reach them, suffering severe injuries from the mutants. Within an hour, the hospital turns into chaos. The screams of patients mix with the bustle of medical staff who are not prepared for such an onslaught. Theo tries to help everyone, but he cannot save them all, and many patients die in the hands of frightened interns. CJ recounts how the Abbeys attack the camp and everyone trying to extinguish the fire. But Carrie and Megan don't believe the farmer's words. They are convinced the mutants have no intelligence and thus could not have had a plan. Jason sides with the women. He is more concerned about the fate of the harvest, but CJ has no good news. All the fields have been burned, and in less than 6 weeks the city will fall to starvation. The food shortage is not the only threat. Theo informs the leader that there is a critical shortage of medicine, and soon people will begin to die from simple colds or minor cuts. Yedlin doesn't hold back in his critique, saying that Pilcher was an idiot. In creating his own world, he failed to consider the basics. Jason's thoughts are interrupted by news that around 100 Abbeys have gathered near the wall. Despite the obvious situation, the leader refuses to admit that the mutants are evolving and the advantage has long been on their side. Teresa spends several hours in intensive care, but her heart gives out, and the last thing the woman sees is her son and husband, with whom she will finally reunite. Megan performs an MRI on the Abbey, and looking at the monitor, Theo sees a surprising result. The part of the brain responsible for thinking and problem-solving is twice the size of a human's. The Abbey's roar echoes throughout the city. The monitor shows that several thousand mutants have gathered near the wall. The creatures locked in the cages respond to their kin, but the female remains remarkably calm. After a conversation with Adam, Theo examines the female Abbey's hand and discovers the pattern. He becomes furious that Megan hadn't told him about the design, but the scientist doesn't understand the significance at this moment. The doctor asks Megan not to interfere while he tries to establish contact with the Abbey. In Theo's opinion, it's the only way to find out what the mutants want and save the city. Yedlin shows the mutants several cards with pictures and tries to explain their meaning. CJ had been one of those who woke up from cryosleep every 100 years to observe changes on Earth. During one such outing, the botanist met a strange young man. He still resembled a human, but had peculiar features. The stranger rambled, ate raw fish, and suffered from unknown ailments. CJ couldn't shake the new companion. The young man demanded to be taken with him and cared for. To avoid risking the others, CJ eliminated the threat. Theo asked Megan to offer the Abbey a treat, but the mutant points towards its kin. This confirms the doctor's theory. She is not just an intelligent creature. She is a leader who cares for her pack. Adam bursts into the lab, demanding that the scientists release the female. He claims that she is the leader of the Abbeys, and her followers are gathering near the wall, ready to do anything to save their leader. A heated argument erupts among the group. Megan is convinced that Adam is overestimating the importance of the mutant, while Theo believes the leader's presence could help them negotiate with the creatures and save the city. Memories take CJ back to the day he woke up and roused the others. Pilcher, the founder of the project, was confident that mutations had ended several hundred years ago and that they were now facing only an empty, uninhabited Earth. But the scientist was wrong. The first walk in the forest reveals strange creatures vaguely resembling humans. Pilcher didn't even attempt to make contact. He also refused to return to cryosleep and slumber for several more centuries. The only thing that occurred to the professor was to declare the mutants enemies, build a city, and fence it off with a tall, electrified wall. Theo tries to communicate with the female Abbey, but Jason arrives at the lab. Like Megan and his predecessor, Pilcher, the leader of the first generation, refuses to seek a peaceful solution, convinced that the remaining humans will prevail against the thousands of creatures at the fence. The argument goes in circles, but Yedlin reminds everyone that the lives of all the city's residents are at stake. Dr. Yedlin explains to the Abbey that Jason is their leader, but the female mutant disagrees. She shows the doctor that he should be the leader of the town. This infuriates the young dictator, and he tries to stop the experiment, but Theo stands his ground. Signaling that he means no harm, Theo unlocks the cage of a male Abbey and tries to enter, but the aggressive mutant doesn't share the doctor's optimism and grabs his arm. On one hand, this frightens everyone present, but on the other, they see the female giving a signal and the monsters obey her. In Theo's opinion, everything went perfectly, but Jason thinks otherwise. Before the leader's eyes, he kills the males and plans to eliminate her as well. Theo wrestles the gun from the madman, and Carrie tries to convince him not to argue with the others. She asks her friend to leave and think things over while the doctor continues his experiments. Megan notices a crimson puddle beneath her and feels unwell. The last thing she sees is the freed female Abby behind her. At the moment when Theo was unlocking the code, the creature memorized the combination and easily repeated it. The city's residents are assured that nothing dangerous is happening and that they can continue their normal lives. But Theo returns to the lab and realizes that things are far from normal. He discovers Megan's body in the empty cage of the female Abby. At the same time, the mutant sneaks towards the exit. Jason arrives at the scene. He orders the building to be searched, unwilling to admit that he is responsible for what happened. The soldiers search every corner of the hospital, including the underground passages, but it's already pointless. The mutant is running through the forest, making her way to her kind. Suddenly, the Abby slips off a cliff, but she manages to collect herself and lands unharmed. Dr. Yedlin insists that they must warn the townspeople. If the female Abby reaches the exit, she will likely open it for thousands of her kin. But Jason stubbornly holds his ground. He plans to send unarmed townsfolk to search for the creature and fight the other Abbies. The town's school children are locked in the school building. The other residents are also informed of the Abby's escape and are ordered to lock themselves in their homes to avoid encountering the creature. The Abby hides in the forest and notices Frank and Lucy walking by. She also sees a couple in love, but she doesn't attack the teenagers, trying to avoid detection. After this, the monster heads straight for the city and attacks one of the soldiers who participated in the hunt. The scream of the unfortunate soldier echoes throughout Wayward Pines, warning the residents of the danger. The Abbey takes the body of its victim with it. Soldiers spot the Abbey on the rooftops of houses. They open fire, but once again the monster manages to escape. The mutant continues to toy with the people, appearing in different locations. All those with any kind of weapon are called in to join the search. Xander gathers a small team, hoping to track down the Abbey. Theo and Adam also set out in search of the mutant, but all they find is the body of a soldier, which the creature dragged away. The hunters realize it was a trap. The Abbey lured them into the forest so they wouldn't interfere with her final tasks in the city. Armed citizens flood the streets, but the Abbey manages to evade them, remaining unnoticed. This leads to frightened hunters firing at each other, solving the mutant's problems for her. Finding several bodies and shooters in the street, Theo tries to de-escalate the situation. He asks a young woman to let the soldiers go so they can take their comrade to the hospital. The number of red dots on the monitor rapidly increases, indicating the number of Abbeys near the wall. Jason shows Carrie the bunker designed especially for them. He confesses to her that this shelter would allow them not only to survive, but also to enter cryosleep for as long as needed to eventually restore Earth. However, Carrie is forced to admit to her boyfriend that after the Abbey's attack, she cannot have children, and there's no point in wasting a capsule on her. Rebecca encounters the Abbey in the middle of the city, but before the monster can attack, Xander injures the mutant, protecting his fiancée and their future child. Breathing a sigh of relief, the couple hurries to the wall to find weak spots and fix them. Xander remembers the pit, and the group theorizes that it might be a tunnel leading into the city. The wounded female Abbey flees into the forest and finds an entrance to such a tunnel. She prepares to leave the city, but Adam appears behind her, intent on killing the mutant. The female Abbey straightens up, and fear flashes in her eyes. Seeing this, the hunter lets her go to her kind. Adam also enters the tunnel, determined to end this once and for all. Jason's squad finds a pipe from which the wild cries of the mutants can be heard. The leader orders the passage to be blown up, hoping this will stop the wild mutants. Adam manages to escape from the other side of the tunnel, but there, he is met by a crowd of wild, hungry Abbeys. However, the female with the pattern on her hand does not allow them to harm the man who saved her life and helped her escape. Hassler walks past unharmed. Despite the return of the leader, the crowd of Abbeys does not leave the area around the fence. The Abbey leader reaches the camp and is taken in by caring elders, remembering all those who became victims of humanity. Observing the Abbeys, Carrie sees that the escaped female is getting worse, and her kin gather around to say their goodbyes. But Jason is not moved by this news. He sees no tragedy in the death of an ordinary mutant. Realizing that all the city's problems are caused by the dictator's stubbornness, Theo decides to address the issue and turns to Xander for help, but the men don't have time to discuss things. CJ invites the doctor to an important meeting with Jason. The leader offers two options: surrender and accept their end, or go back into cryosleep. The female Abbey's condition worsens, but her kin don't abandon her. They treat her wound and do everything they can to keep their leader alive. Jason addresses the townspeople, tells them about the Abbey invasion, and gives instructions for the evacuation. This causes unrest, but CJ steps in to calm everyone down, assuring them that the process is completely safe. After giving several lectures, CJ heads to the control center to check the equipment, but the plan is under threat. The program encounters a loading error. CJ informs Jason of the issue, insisting that the capsules need to be recharged. But there is hardly any time left, and the leader will have to choose who gets to leave the danger zone first. To make the right decision, Jason asks Dr. Yedlin to check all the citizens' profiles and assess their health on a 5-point scale. Theo dislikes this idea and suggests using a lottery to choose the lucky ones, but Jason insists that only those valuable for reproduction should remain in the end. Yedlin decides to use Carrie. He tells her that Jason has decided to leave her to be torn apart by the Abbeys because of her inability to have children. The doctor convinces her of his truth and suggests she eliminate the traitor. Many years ago, while planning the construction of a new world, David Pilcher adopted a child to make him the heir to everything. But before signing the papers, the professor meets the boy's mother, Carrie. She was the one who gave her son to the professor, who later named him Jason. While flipping through his fiancé's personal file, Jason finds a secret folder where he discovers that his fiancée is actually his biological mother. At that very moment, Carrie enters the room. The calm conversation escalates into a scuffle and a fight. Finally, a gunshot is heard in the room. Jason recalls the first time he saw Carrie, how she was introduced to the new world, and how he promised she would always be safe. But now the once-in-love young people are on the floor, in pools of crimson. As Jason fades, Carrie takes his hand to stay by his side. The female Abby regains consciousness and signals to her kin, gathering them around her. Jason is brought to the hospital, and Theo prepares him for surgery. Meanwhile, in the forest, the Abbeys are preparing for a final assault on the city. The residents are being prepared for evacuation into cryocapsules, but most townspeople linger around the hospital, waiting for news about their leader. After several hours of surgery, Theo announces Jason's death to everyone. The doctor assures the people that the plan remains unchanged. They will all be saved soon. CJ hands Dr. Yedlin the list Jason had made. He suggests following the old plan to avoid panic and save precious time. Registration for the capsules begins, and the first to enter are women and children. Those not on the first list are asked to wait at home for their turn, but many suspect they will never be called. Even among the children, there are excess. One of these extras is Frank, who had once openly told Theo that he didn't want to have children. Xander also doesn't receive an invitation. He realizes this is Yedlin's personal revenge for taking his wife. The closer the Abbeys get to the fence, the more aggressive they become. Their movements are watched by the female leader, standing above the rest. Watching the screen, Theo realizes that the fence is on the verge of being breached. The doctor decides to record one last message for future generations in which he urges humanity not to repeat David Pilcher's experiments. Such endeavors only lead to dire consequences. To somehow fix the situation, Dr. Yedlin plans to inject himself with 3 strains of dangerous viruses involuntarily surrendered to the Abbeys. This is how he intends to wipe out the terrible mutant species. Those who didn't get a place in the capsules begin to panic and search for alternative ways out. Riots break out in the city. Only Xander and Frank calmly accept their fate, sitting in a small street bar. Theo arrives to pick up the boys and take them to the departure point, but the road is blocked by 2 young men with a burning bottle and a firm decision to steal the car. Xander manages to calm the boys down, and the group leaves. On the way, Theo picks up another passenger, his intern Arlene. Yedlin returns to the lab to inject himself with the virus strains and head for the wall. But there he is met by Carrie, who asks to take on this mission herself. After Jason's death and the news that he was her son, she no longer wants to run from her fate. Learning that she has already injected herself with the viruses, Theo agrees to leave with the others. As a parting gesture, he gives her one more vial, which will numb her pain during the encounter with the Abbeys. Before the capsules are launched, Theo wishes the travelers a safe journey. He admits that he doesn't know what awaits them in the future, but hopes it will be better than the present. People take their places as the city slowly comes to a standstill in the face of danger. CJ is supposed to be the last to take his place, but his capsule malfunctions and the man sees his wife, who has been dead for several hundred years. Nevertheless, CJ decides to stay behind, hoping that one day he can change the world. Carrie opens the wall and steps outside the city, into the land where the Abbeys will live for many centuries. And so the series ends. Aliens arriving on Earth first kill an entire small town and then bring half of its population back to life, although it's hard to call it life.
We searched for a new home,
We found one. This planet.
Somewhere in Pennsylvania, in the small town of Berridge, a family sits down for dinner. Suddenly there is a loud bang outside, the lights go out and people briefly come to their senses before dying. Later on, exobiologist Lauren Stone hears news reports on TV about a powerful explosion in Berridge that killed the entire population of the town, 1,300 people. The air in the settlement is poisoned by some toxic substance, and the theory that the explosion occurred at the local chemical plant becomes increasingly popular. Lauren takes a bath and remembers herself, her father, and a field she used to run through. Her memories are interrupted by the arrival of the military, although Lauren does not quite understand how she can help with the investigation. Colonel Emmerich introduces her to astrobiologist Santiago. Geologists confirmed that the accident was the result of a meteorite impact which released a deadly gas. That's why they were invited to the crash site. The military will be grateful for any evidence they find that can shed light on the nature of the incident. Emmerich assures Lauren that he chose her because he read her work, but asks her to take an alcohol test. Scientists are dressed in protective suits and taken to the meteorite crash site. On the way, Santiago praises her book on microbiology in Antarctica and signs of extraterrestrial life, but the woman doesn't engage in conversation. Arriving at the site, the pair only sees a snowy field and a small pile of ground. While Santiago inspects the area, Lauren notices a small sprout of some red plant and pities it for growing in such a terrible place. Upon arriving home, Lauren begins to search for similar cases and finds mention of a similar incident. In 2013, a meteorite exploded over the city of Chelyabinsk in Russia, and an interview with the local resident was filmed by American television. She recounted that after the meteorite fell, a poisonous gas spread throughout the area, causing many people to die. It was also said that a very large tree grew at the site of the impact, around which all living things died. The tree was cut down and information about the incident was kept secret. In the postscript to the interview, journalists reported that the woman was killed almost immediately after it. The next day, doctors begin to perform an autopsy on the man who died in Berridge, and at first everything looks completely normal. But when the doctor makes an incision, a strange blue liquid begins to seep out, which then returns to the body after a short time and the wound heals. But even more surprising is the resurrection of the man who suddenly sits up on the table and silently looks down, not reacting to the voices of those around him. The man has no pulse or blood pressure and his body is cold. In other words, by all indications, the man is dead. Suddenly there are cries behind the door. It turns out that another 40 people suddenly opened their eyes and came back to life. The doctors tried to get some kind of reaction from the resurrected, but to no avail. They are all residents of the town center who not only inhaled the poisonous gas but also ingested some substance that led to DNA transformation. And the only thing the resurrected do is occasionally turn around. Meanwhile, Lauren tells Emmerich about the Chelyabinsk meteorite, but the people in Russia were also victims, which means that this is someone's terrible plan. But the colonel does not believe in conspiracy theories. Later, a government commission discusses the incident and proposes simply destroying the bodies before it's too late. But to get answers, all the data must be carefully studied, otherwise Manhattan could be next. Later, the woman buys alcohol and drinks it while sitting in the car, reminiscing about a trip she took with her father to a secret place. The next day, Lauren goes to a room where the revived people are sitting and, selecting a girl, tells her about a book her mother used to read to her when she was a child, who has long since passed away. At that moment, her phone rings and a photo of the red plant from the scene of the incident appears on the screen, and the girl suddenly grabs Lauren's hand. The woman tells her colleagues about this and suggests that the plant is to blame. Santiago notices that all the survivors are looking in one direction, to the north, where the crash site is located. And then the colonel confesses that they found a sapling, but they don't know what it is because the plant is huge and continues to grow. The thing is that the area is sealed off and the plant was only noticed when it became visible from a distance. It turns out that it wasn't a meteorite that fell on the ground, but a huge seed. A team of scientists is sent to the site, taking one of the revived with them. They bring him to an unimaginably huge tree on a cart and watch from a distance, but he remains motionless. And when people have lost all hope, the man in the wheelchair suddenly moves, raises his head, looks in surprise at his hands and the snow under his feet. And then he admits that he can't survive in the Earth's environment, so he will stay here. Upon returning, Lauren reports that the tree is generating the necessary environment for its survival, including the air that is toxic to humans. The aliens arrived on Earth through special portals that scientists call wormholes. She is bombarded with questions, revealing that she has had problems with alcohol and prohibited substances. Later, a psychotherapist calls her answering machine, who was waiting for her at the session as part of his sentence. They were supposed to discuss her childhood memories that are haunting her, but she didn't show up. At that moment, her father shows up at the door, but Lauren is not pleased to see him. He tries to start the conversation and recalls how on her 8th birthday she asked for a scientific laboratory and they gave her an old barn. However, her obsession with space spiraled out of control and her mother became worried. Sometime later, the colonel summons Lauren again. The alien wants to speak, but only with her, as he sees her as a friend. They have prepared a list of questions and ask her to find out where they came from and why they came. The alien explains that their home is no longer suitable for their species. They were searching for a new home and found it using coordinates received from a human with the call sign Supernova 94. From that same human, the aliens learned all the strengths and weaknesses of humans. The alien asks the military to leave, and Lauren admits that the tree will soon destroy everything as it is harming the planet. The alien then says that humans will not be able to stop them because they are used to fighting and they have abilities. And here Santiago starts acting strangely. He drops his suitcase and begins to unzip his protective suit. The military personnel try to contain him, but they cannot do anything. The man falls to the ground and tears the hose from the mask of a soldier who was trying to help him. The soldier removes his useless mask and dies. Then one of the soldiers suggests shooting the alien, and just then they are hit by a sound attack that drives them crazy and they open fire on each other. One of the survivors takes stunned Lauren away. Later, a fighter jet armed with missiles is sent to the tree. The pilots see a small figure of a person at the base of the tree and receive orders to attack the target. But suddenly an impenetrable dome covers the tree. The missiles explode, causing no harm to the tree. Meanwhile, the news reports that the FBI is searching for a person with the nickname Supernova 94 who seems to be responsible for the expansion. People around the world tell stories about strange sounds that occasionally come from unknown sources. In some places, smoke emerges from the ground, killing all living things. People pray day and night, and martial law has been imposed in many countries. The earth trembles, crops die, and vegetables rot in the ground. One day, Lauren goes to her father's house, but first she approaches the locked barn, which has a sign that reads Lauren's laboratory. But after looking at the house, she walks away and heads towards the tree. For many years, she has been tormented by the question of who or what she is. The end of the world is approaching, but she feels relief, as if she will finally live freely. And she plans to find the truth right here. She meets the alien who tells her that the tree is undergoing transformation. Feeling the tremble under her feet, Lauren lies down on the ground and listens to the hum of the planet. The time has come, new life is growing, and all of this has happened because of her. And finally, Lauren remembers the day when her father brought her to a secret base where an unidentified flying object had been brought down. Her father left her to wait in the corridor. Bored, she wandered through the rooms, listening to her father being instructed about a powerful and hostile creature that had tried to plant something before it was shot down by the military. The girl found the sarcophagus containing the alien and reached out to the glass. Suddenly, the creature reached out and touched the glass from the other side. She screamed in terror, not understanding what strange thing was happening to her, causing her to lose consciousness. The frightened guard found her and took her to her father. But the girl looked healthy and left with her father. Only from that day on, Lauren hasn't been quite herself. She draws super complex designs of interstellar ships and writes incomprehensible formulas. At school, she constantly gets in trouble, skillfully manipulating not only her classmates but also her teachers, calling herself an alien who wants to go home. And one day, Lauren tunes a transmitter she has built and contacts a distant planet, taking the call sign Supernova 94. Her parents are horrified and forbid her from entering the laboratory. Lauren smashes toys, draws on walls, and tells her mother the date of her death. It is then that her father learns of her new DNA. The girl seems to be changing, becoming something other than human. Adult Lauren sobs in horror at her discovery, but the alien welcomes her home and she remembers telling the distant planet all about Earth. Meanwhile, mysterious X-shaped objects begin to appear all over the planet. They emerge everywhere, in forests and cities, deserts and mountains. And one day they suddenly explode, spreading black smoke that kills all life around them. And no one can hide or survive as the roots have already penetrated the entire Earth. The planet is no longer suitable for the human race. All earthly species and plants have been extinct. The evolution of a new species has begun, and Lauren's journey has come to an end. She's finally home. And this is where the movie ends. Helly wakes up lying on a table in front of a speaker, from which an unknown voice persistently asks her name. The girl tries to come to her senses and understand what's happening, but the voice doesn't answer her questions, repeating the same thing and insisting that Helly must undergo a short survey. Realizing she can't leave the room, she agrees to the testing but immediately realizes she knows none of the answers. She can't remember her own name, the state she was born in, or even what her mother looks like. Confused, Helly sits down on the floor, and at that moment, the door to the room opens. In the doorway, she sees the silhouette of a man. Shortly before this, sitting in his car, Mark Scout is having a breakdown, unable to stop crying. Finally, he composes himself, wipes his face and steps outside, then heads to work at the large Lumon Company building as if nothing happened. In the locker room, Scout changes his shoes, watch, and pass, swapping his name tag for a blue square with the company's logo. At the entrance, a guard searches him with a device resembling a metal detector, after which the clerk enters an elevator where he experiences slight dizziness that completely alters his state of mind. Easily navigating the maze of long, pristine corridors, Mark reaches his office designed for 4 clerks, labeled as the Macro Data Refinement Department. Each employee sitting at their personal computer selects random numbers from a multitude displayed on the screen. After a few minutes of work, Scout realizes that only 2 of his colleagues are present today. Pity, his partner and best friend, unexpectedly didn't come to work without notifying anyone. Milchick, the deputy director with a smile, enters the office and invites Mark to come with him. The men arrive at the office of Harmony Coble, the department head, who talks to the employee as if all her words are memorized in advance. She places a speaker in front of her, through which the board of directors participates in the meeting, but Mark hears nothing but strange hissing. Coble informs the clerk that Pity no longer works at the company, which greatly surprises and upsets Mark. No explanation for the news follows, but Mark is appointed the new team lead, replacing his good friend. Immediately after the appointment, Milchick leads Mark to a room with a microphone and monitors, where he will greet a new company employee for the first time. Thus, Mark becomes the voice and silhouette that Helly first encountered. When Scout enters the room with the frightened girl, he calmly starts explaining to her that she is now a Lumen employee. Ignoring Helly's questions and objections, Mark begins to read her important information about the importance of separating work and personal life until the girl finally loses it, throwing the speaker at the head of the boring man. But Helly fails to leave again and obediently sits down to listen to Mark, who seems to be about to clarify the situation. Unable to bear it any longer, Mark, breaking all instructions, hints to Helly that she needs to ask to leave 3 times, and after that, he finally leads her out of the room, also guiding her through the numerous white corridors. Eventually, the pair arrive at an exit which states that separated passage is prohibited, and Mark tells the girl she can leave the building. However, when Helly steps out the door, she finds herself in the same place she just left. Mark takes Helly to Harmony's office, who welcomes the new employee and gives her a disc, which should finally clarify everything. On it, the girl sees herself addressing herself, saying that she voluntarily participates in a program to separate consciousness into work and personal, where in each reality she will not remember another one. At 5 p.m., the workday in the offices ends, and the employees leave the building. Coming out of the elevator, none of them remembers where and how they worked, their colleagues, or anything from the day. When Mark almost hits Helly with his car, he doesn't recognize her, just as she doesn't recognize him. On the windshield of the car, the man finds an envelope from the company, stating he accidentally fell at work, and as an apology, the company gifts him a certificate to a nice restaurant. Naturally, he also doesn't remember that the bruise on his forehead appeared after interacting with Helly. Returning home, Mark confronts his strange neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, after which he plans to spend the evening as usual in front of the TV. but his pregnant sister Devon arrives and drags him to a dinner party with friends to shake up her relative who, in this reality, cannot get over his wife's death, which led him to agree to the severance procedure to sometimes forget his pain. The company gathers at the table of the strange hosts, who announce a dinner without food, serving only a glass of water. Reckon, Devon's husband, raises the topic of Mark being separated, which causes debates at the table. Devon convinces her brother to stay overnight, and the young people talk late into the night, reminiscing about their childhood in parents. Waking up at night to drink water, Mark Scout sees a strange man in the yard, hiding behind a tree and watching him. The next day, Mark decides to use his certificate and goes to the restaurant, where this same man joins him at the table and demands he hang up the phone during a conversation with his neighbor. The man turns out to be Mark's best friend, his partner Pitty, whom he doesn't remember in this reality. He hands his colleague an envelope with an address where he can be found and short explanations that he managed to remember everything despite the severance operation. Mrs. Selvig waits for her neighbor and apologizes to him for the constant conflicts over the trash bins. The woman caringly asks the man to sleep more and take care of himself. Looking at her, Mark doesn't recognize his boss Harmony Coble, and it's hard to tell if the boss knows they are also neighbors or if she also lives in two personalities. Helly continues her training at Lumen, but the girl still can't grasp what happened, despite Milchick explaining the severance operation to her in detail several times. A new workday begins. Mark tidies up the office, drinks coffee, and while wiping his desk, he focuses on a group photo featuring himself and his colleagues, including Pitty. He gathers identical pictures from all 4 desks and hides them in a closet to avoid being upset over his missing friend. When all the employees gather in the office, Mark explains to Helly what their job entails. She doesn't quite understand the purpose of searching for numbers, but she sits down and stares at the monitor along with the others. During the workday, the girl learns that her other version, the one living outside Lumen, is called an extra, but there's no way to communicate with her as the guard at the entrance checks for any text codes. Milchick gathers the team for a regular game where each participant talks about everything they remember and know, as well as their feelings and emotions. At the meeting, Mark shares his concerns about Pitty, saying he doesn't know if his friend is even alive. Milchick abruptly stops such conversations, reminding everyone that there are no deceased at Lumen as the company takes care of its employees. The team's fun ends with a new group photo, but Helly suddenly announces that she doesn't want to work there and plans to leave. Eventually, the girl realizes that this version of her can't leave the Lumen building at all. Moreover, the rebel ends up in the hands of Mr. Reiner, the head of security, but Mark manages to save his friend, preventing the boss from taking her to the break room. Returning home, Mark plans to read the postcard left by Pitty, but a knock at the door distracts him. Mrs. Selvig decides to visit her neighbor and offer him homemade cookies as an apology. After seeing off the guest, the man falls asleep and only remembers the letter the next morning. Calling in sick to work, he decides to skip a day and drives to the address mentioned in the postcard, finding an abandoned area of the city where he discovers his Fremen in an old greenhouse. One of Mark's colleagues, elderly Irving, falls asleep at his desk and gets a reprimand from the management before being sent to the staff psychologist. There, while waiting for his appointment, he meets Bert, a similarly aged employee from another department. Meeting Pitty, Mark learns about the restroom where employees monotonously apologize for their work misdemeanors. Pitty, who managed to cancel the severance, reveals that something terrible is happening at the company, which is why he is now being hunted. Mark takes his friend home and houses him in his basement. Pitty constantly suffers from headaches and hallucinations, often feeling like he's back at work. When he recovers, he tells Mark that there is no double life, and while they sit there, their other selves continue working in the office. Despite all the details, Mark repeats that he doesn't want to cancel the severance to avoid remembering his deceased wife, but Pitty tells his colleague that he has seen him with red eyes at work because even there he feels his pain, just not remembering what caused it. Reading the news in the morning, Mark announces that Helly's extra refused her resignation from Lumen. Pitty remains in the house alone and hears the door open upstairs. Watching from hiding, he recognizes his former boss in the uninvited guest. Helly constantly tries to pass a note to her extra, but Mark carefully watches the girl, and even when she decides to swallow a pen cap with the message inside, he informs her that the detector will show that too, leading to an unpleasant procedure to extract it. In the corridor, the office employees meet their colleagues, among whom is Bert, Irving's friend. The men exchange a few standard phrases and wink at each other. The entire company goes to the Personality Center to learn more about the creators and managers of Lumen, and Helly again uses the situation to try to escape. This time, Mark fails to cover for his friend, and Mr. Reiner takes the girl to the restroom, where she is forced to repeat words of apology and penance over 1,000 times for her behavior until she repents. Mark sees that the photos from the group photo session have arrived and decides to replace the old ones. Removing the pictures from their frames, he discovers a floor plan drawn by Pitty on one of them. At the same time, Pitty makes it to a night store and collapses there, unconscious. The ambulance is unable to help the man in time. All of this happens in front of Mark, and he quickly rushes home, where he removes all traces of his guest's stay in the basement. Having turned off the lights, he hears his colleague's mobile phone vibrating. Bert visits to give Irving the bags they sew in their department, ahead of the others, and also invites his friend to visit their office, to which Irving happily agrees. Helly returns to the office completely depressed after spending a whole day in the test. Mark tries to reason with his friend and make sure she doesn't provoke conflicts anymore, but finding the photo with the floor plan drawn by Pitty in Mark's desk, Helly accuses her colleague of hypocrisy as he convinces her to accept their situation, yet keeps such things himself. Bert shows Irving paintings in his department and at one point touches his friend's hand, after which Irving embarrassedly runs back to his workstation. Devon's husband leaves a gift on Mark's doorstep, his own book about the meaning of life without severance. However, when Harmony broke into her neighbor's house, she took the book and brought it to work. Returning to the office, Irving noticed the bright cover, but besides the book itself, he was surprised by something else. The first page had a dedication stating the book was intended for Mark Scout. Irving brought his colleague to explain what this all meant, but naturally Mark could not remember his relative or anything from his external life. Not wanting to give up, Helly found a paper cutter in the office and, threatening to harm herself, demanded permission to record a message for her extra. Receiving a response, she realized that it was not so much about the company as about herself. The response from Helly in the outside world was such that she should obediently continue her work at Lumen. Pitty's hidden phone in the basement keeps vibrating, but seeing an unknown number on the screen, Mark hesitates to answer the call. Mark goes to the funeral home to say goodbye to his friend and is surprised to see his neighbor Mrs. Selvig there, who also did not expect to meet him. Both lie to each other about the reason for their visit, but the woman keeps an eye on her neighbor. At the ceremony, Mark meets the deceased friend's ex-wife and daughter, and they immediately guess where the man knew their family head from. Waiting for everyone to be occupied with saying goodbye, Harmony sneaks up to the body and extracts the severance chip from his head. Arriving home, Mark changes his mind about going in and drives to the place where his wife once died. Harmony brings the chip to work and entrusts Milchick to check it in the laboratory to find out how the man managed to cancel the severance. Also, the woman calls Casey, asking the staff psychologist to conduct a session with Mark, as she fears he will also be tempted to cancel the severance. Locked in the bathroom, Mark reads the stolen book about the meaning of life. When it's time for the session, the man obediently comes at the appointed time. The psychologist lights a candle that Harmony stole from a box with personal belongings of Mark's deceased wife. The boss herself watches the conversation through a monitor. Helly, after saying goodbye to her colleagues, goes home. In the elevator, the girl brings a trash bin and a rope, as she can no longer endure the monotonous days without the possibility of liberation. Tying the rope to the elevator ceiling, the girl knocks the trash bin from under her feet. Mark calls the elevator at the end of the workday, and when the doors open, he sees lifeless Helly. Trying to save his colleague, he calls for help, and Mr. Reiner appears immediately, ordering Mark to quickly get into the elevator to avoid additional witnesses. Coming to work the next day, the first thing Mark remembers is the incident with Helly. Stepping onto the floor, he is immediately taken in by Harmony and Milchick, who reprimand the department head for not keeping an eye on his employee. Harmony gives Pitty's chip to Reiner and instructs him to find out who and how managed to hack it and restore the consciousness of the separated. The man asks if the head informed the board of directors about what happened to Helly, but Harmony avoids answering. Locked in the bathroom, Mark continues reading the stolen book, which increasingly inspires him. After work, the guy takes his things from the locker and sees many voice messages from Rickon, informing that Devon will soon give birth and everyone expects the brother to be with her. Mark heads straight to the maternity cottage settlement to support his relative. In a conversation with Rickon, he learns about the book he left on his porch as a surprise, but it never reached its owner. Devon steps out of the cottage to find coffee and meets another pregnant woman. The future mothers talk and discuss their unborn children, but Devon has to return as her contractions intensify. Comforting his sister, Mark shares his suspicions about Lumen and his intention to find out what the company is up to. Psychologist Miss Casey comes to the office tasked with monitoring Helly and reporting any signs of melancholy and sadness to the management. Despite the specialist's surveillance, Mark manages to take his colleague to another wing to talk without eavesdroppers. Wandering the corridors, the pair find a department where goats are raised, which greatly surprises them. This further confirms that none of the separated employees even suspect what the company is working on. Irving meets with Bert in the conference room, but their conversation is immediately interrupted by Dylan, who forbids his co-worker from interacting with an employee from another department. Miss Casey finds the runaways and brings them back to the office, watched by Harmony through a monitor. Mark explains their escape as a health walk he took his colleague on. At home, the head receives a call from Reiner, informing her that they have tracked the source of the hack on Pitty's chip. According to the security officer, it could only have been done by one person, former Lumen employee, Gabby. Mark takes out his friend's phone from the box and sees that the unknown number is still calling. After giving birth, Devon goes for a walk in the park with her baby and sees the same woman she met in the maternity cottage. Waving at her and not receiving a response, the young mother decides to approach, but it becomes clear that her friend does not remember her at all. Furthermore, the baby she holds is named differently than she introduced him in their conversation, and when asked why the name was changed, the woman cannot answer, as if she doesn't understand the topic at all. The 4 employees of the Macro Data Refinement Department gather in the cafeteria, and Mark and Helly suggest to their colleagues that they explore the building and meet other departments. However, the timid and law-abiding Irving and Dylan do not approve of such behavior. Harmony summons Mark and informs him that Miss Casey has been punished and sent to the restroom for not keeping an eye on Helly on the day Mark took her out of the office. The 4 decide to meet Bert's department and find out what they do. While the colleagues get acquainted, Dylan explores the unfamiliar office and finds interesting cards. He manages to slip one into his pocket before an unhappy milkshake arrives to return the curious clerks to their workplace. Back in the office, they are greeted by Harmony. After solemnly singing the Lumen anthem, the head sends Mark to the restroom, where he meets an exhausted Casey. Devon looks for a lactation consultant, and her advertisement is answered by an experienced nurse. When she arrives at the home of the young parents, the woman recognizes her as her brother's neighbor, Mrs. Selbig. As soon as the helper takes the baby girl in her arms and she stops crying, the couple trusts her, and Devon doesn't question how Selbig ended up there. A boy sits in front of the TV with cartoons, closing his eyes and counting to 1,000, starting to lose count. Dylan sits in the locker room not understanding where he is, and Milchick appears, demanding to know where the clerk hid the card from the neighboring department. Suddenly, a boy bursts into the closet and jumps on Dylan's neck, calling him Dad. The man realizes that his work consciousness has been transferred to the life of his extra, and this is what his life outside Lumen looks like. Waking up at night, Mark turns on Pitty's phone and answers the call. A woman's voice understands who she is talking to and arranges a meeting. Arriving at the college, Mark meets Gabby. She was the one who installed chips in all the separated, and now she's trying to fix the situation. During the conversation, Reiner appears out of nowhere, but the woman deals with him, explaining that he poses a threat to everyone trying to pull the separated out. Gabby sends Mark home and promises to contact him to help him retrieve his another personality that is constantly at Lumen. She hands the clerk Reiner's pass, which is untraceable and opens any door, and instructs him to take it to work, hoping that the other Mark will understand how to use it. Arriving at work, Dylan inquires Milchick about what happened and who the boy was who called him Dad. The man can't think of anything else, realizing he has a different life going on somewhere else. The supervisor tries to gloss over the question, and knowing Dylan's love for rewards and incentives, promises him special bonuses, explaining that it was a random activation that went a little off plan. The employees learn that they are now working under lock and key to prevent wandering the corridors and interacting with colleagues from other departments. Harmony visits Devon's house daily as a consultant, but in reality, she tries to gather more information about Mark. Over a cup of tea, she finally learns that the man has questions and doubts about his job and already regrets having separated. Milchick comes to the office and announces a 5-minute music and dance event to keep the team's spirits up. During the dance, Mark discovers a pass in his pocket, but realizes it's probably a handover from his extra, so he hides it back to use at a more opportune moment. The music break abruptly ends as Dylan attacks Milchick, demanding he tell him about the son he accidentally saw during the switch. The clerk tells his colleagues about his awakening and how he saw his son, and now he wants to cancel the severance. Helly realizes there is some way to awaken and only needs to find out the details to return to normal life. Of the four, only Irving disagrees with breaking the community's rules, also trying to dissuade his friends. Using Reiner's card, the group exits into the corridor, but Irving leaves his friends and heads to the neighboring department to find out what happened to his friend Bert. Mark and Helly decide not to waste time and find the control point, which can manage all Lumen employees. Taking the manual with them, the pair returns to the office to avoid being caught by Harmony. Irving arrives at the other department and finds himself at a party celebrating Bert's retirement. Horrified, he realizes he will never see his friend again and tries to explain that the only way to leave Lumen is for one reason, but everyone pretends not to hear his arguments. Dylan studies the instructions, and the employees find out that not everyone can switch. Someone has to manage the process from inside. The guy volunteers to do this so that everyone else can escape to the outside world and find those who can help them cancel the severance. Returning to his department, Irving tells his friends that he will look for a way out with them, wishing to erase Lumen from existence. Irving's extra sits on a bench in the park with his pet. Returning home, the man approaches the easel and paints a picture using only black colors. Dozens of absolutely identical black paintings already stand against the walls. Harmony calls Mark and schedules his last session with Mrs. Casey, supposedly to close the quarter. In the office, the man learns that the psychologist is working her last day and is being replaced by another specialist. The employees await Dylan's waffle party, planning to use this time for the switch. Trying to act as calm as possible, they rehearse their escape plan. The board of directors learns about the incident with Helly in the elevator and suspends Harmony from managing the company. Using the stolen pass, Mark sends his friends outside one by one, leaving himself for last. Dylan heads to the waffle party, then sneaks away to the control center to start the operation. Each employee, once in the outside world, must carefully study their extra's life and figure out who in their circle they can ask for help. Harmony, devastated by her dismissal after so many years of loyal service, is at home when the doorbell rings. Resuming her disguise as Mrs. Selvig, she opens the door to find Mark, who inquires if she'll attend the event Devin and Rickon are organizing for their book release. Initially citing poor health, Mrs. Selvig eventually agrees to attend, saying she'll arrive a bit later. When she arrives at the party, she tries to stick close to Mark to learn why he wants to leave Lumen. Dylan breaks into the control room and locks himself in, preparing to launch his friends. Reaching the controls, he pulls the levers and the process begins. Finding himself in Devin's house, Mark's extra doesn't recognize anyone. The same happens with Irving and Helly. Irving finds himself at an easel with a black canvas, while Helly is at a reception among influential people. After learning from the guest that Devin is his sister, Mark tries to speak with her alone for help, but he can't manage it due to the crowd and commotion in the house. Exploring his apartment, Irving realizes he's alone except for his dog. He finds military awards and a locked chest containing items and photos of his son who died in the war. Helly's situation is the most complex. While examining the hall, she realizes she's not just a participant in the severance program, but a direct descendant of Lumon's founders, the daughter of the current company owner. Her extra is supposed to give a speech today about the benefits of having two entities and not wasting personal life on work. At the bottom of the chest, Irving finds strange records and a map with many marks. It becomes clear his extra has long been trying to unravel Lumen's mystery. Gathering everything, he finds car keys and plans to drive to Bert, whose name he found marked on the map. Guests at Devin's house attentively listen to Rickon, but Mark is preoccupied with finding help. Noticing his boss, he doesn't immediately realize she shouldn't be there. Addressing Harmony by her last name, he inadvertently reveals himself and his plan. In a hurry, he runs to his sister, leaving Harmony in confusion. Devin hands the baby over to the feeding assistant and finally makes time for her brother, who tells her that it's actually his another person, and he urgently needs help to get out of the trap. The woman doesn't fully understand what's happening, but she tells Mark that her brother decided to have surgery, unable to cope with the pain of his wife Gemma's death. Helly, watching her own interview on huge screens advocating the benefits of severance, feels dizzy and hides in the restroom, where her father finds her and expects a vibrant and emotional performance. Mark asks his sister about his boss from Lumen being at her party, and based on Devon's description, realizes she has entrusted her child to a terrifying woman. Rushing out of the room, Devon begins searching for her daughter but finds neither the nanny, her car, nor the girl. Eventually, a guest finds the baby carrier in an empty room. Meanwhile, Harmony races to Lumen, simultaneously calling Milchick to inform him of the emergency. The 3 employees have escaped to the outside world. Milchick rushes to the control room, trying to negotiate with Dylan to open the door. Realizing that bonuses and incentives won't work in this situation, the supervisor promises to tell him not only about the boy from the closet, but also about his 2 children. Dylan remains steadfast, but Milchick understands he needs to enter the room, so he cuts the belt Dylan used to lock himself in. Arriving at the specified address, Irving sees his friend from the neighboring department relaxing with a companion in his own home. Helly prepares to go on stage, intending to tell everyone the truth. Mark, left alone in the room, decides to look at family photos, and on one of them, he sees himself with his deceased wife. To his horror, it turns out to be Mrs. Casey. Harmony manages to arrive at the gala event and tells Helly she knows everything. Unfazed, Helly whispers her plans to her boss and takes the stage, despite threats that she will make her friends suffer. Irving decides to step out of the car and knocks on Bert's door to tell him the truth about working at Lumen. Mark tells his sister that his wife is alive and he knows where to find her, while Helly starts speaking from the stage, revealing that all the sweet stories about severance are pure lies and that extras suffer, trapped. At that moment, Milchick cuts the belt, bursts into the control room, and pushes Dylan away from the levers. All the escapees return their extras consciousness of personal life. This concludes the first season. Clearly, many questions remain unanswered. Most importantly, what exactly do the employees at Lumen Company do? Hopefully, we will get the answers in the second season, set to release in 2024. The crew of the spaceship is in cryogenic sleep. Astronaut George Taylor is dictating his final report. Exactly half a year ago by the ship's time, they left Cape Canaday. Over 7 centuries have passed on Earth during this period. The people who sent them on this journey have long since died, but Taylor has no regrets about what they've done. Everything seems different from here. The flow of time is distorted and space is limitless. The only thing he would like to know is whether humanity, the miracle of the universe that sent him into the sky, continues to wage war. A last glance at the clock. It's March 27, 2673 on Earth. He looks at his comrades and lies down in his place. After a while, the ship makes an emergency landing on an unknown planet and finds itself in the middle of a body of water. The crew wakes up and realizes that they have slept much longer than the calculated time. But the most horrifying shock is the death of the only woman, Stewart. At that moment, water begins to enter the ship. They need to evacuate, especially since the samples showed that the atmosphere is suitable for breathing. Looking at the ship's clock, which is frozen at Earth time, November 25, 3978, the crew abandons the sinking ship. Boarding a life raft, the humans sail to shore, marveling at the grandeur of the surrounding nature. There is no sign of intelligent life anywhere. Taylor reminds them that they are 320 light-years from Earth on an unknown planet in the constellation Orion. It is impossible to determine more precisely as no one has had time to look at the instrument readings. Upon landing on the shore, Taylor takes inventory of what they were able to salvage from the ship. A pistol, 20 rounds of ammunition, a first aid kit, and a 3-day supply of food and water. The only question now is how long is a day here? They are discussing the strange death of Stewart, apparently caused by depressurization. It seems they were flying for 18 months, while on Earth it has been about 2,000 years. There is no hope of returning, and time has erased everything they knew. Therefore, they need to start studying this planet. Analysis show that nothing can grow here as there is very little carbon dioxide. But there is nothing dangerous to human health either. They have 72 hours left until they run out of food. Landon sets up a small flag of the United States of America on the shore and the astronauts set off on their journey. The surroundings are strange and wild, bizarre rocks and lifeless canyons. The people almost get trapped under landslides several times. Thunderbolts light up the sky without bringing rain. and the sky itself is covered with clouds with no satellites or landmarks. One thing they know for sure, there's a time gap between them and Earth. Their loved ones died 20 centuries ago. Even if they returned, no one would remember them. Taylor urges his comrades on. Why did they embark on this flight? Was it for fame, new knowledge, or the opportunity to live longer? But now they have lived much longer than any other human on Earth. Only Taylor set out on this journey because he's a dreamer. He is confident that there must be something better than humans in the universe. At that moment, Dodge calls out to them. He has found life. A barely noticeable green shoot has sprouted from rocky desert. This means there are plants here and they need to find them. The group continues forward. Every way they look, they see unfriendly rocks, but ahead they see green bushes and some strange crosses that resemble scarecrows. After walking a little further, the astronauts are thrilled to finally see water ahead. The excited group quickly sheds their clothes and jumps in. After that, they swim towards the shore and notice human footprints on the sand. Suddenly, they see dark figures stealing their clothes. The men chase after the thieves, who leave behind obvious traces of their path, such as broken clothing and scraps. Soon they come across their torn clothes and put on whatever remains. Finally, they reach a plain and see many people behaving quite strangely. They are silent and pay no attention to the astronauts, instead calmly gathering and eating different fruits. The Earthlings are puzzled as their fellow humans seem almost feral. Luckily, they are not cannibals. Suddenly, an ominous sound comes from the forest and the people start running. The astronauts try to understand what is happening and suddenly see armed riders. Shots are fired and then monkeys appear on the clearing, apparently hunting the humans. The Earthlings attempt to flee and in the heat of the chase they split up. Shots are heard from all directions and Dodge is killed. Taylor, along with others, runs towards the river, and just when it seems like he's about to make it, one of the monkeys shoots him in the neck, rendering him unconscious. The tied-up astronaut is thrown into a cell with other prisoners. He's surprised to see the monkeys taking pictures as if it's a souvenir. George is brought to a hospital where he's examined by scientist monkeys. They examine Taylor, who's wearing strange clothing. But two chimpanzees argue about the need to study the animal's brains, ignoring Taylor, who's still recovering from his throat wound and unable to speak. In the morning, Dr. Zyra does her rounds. She's intrigued by a strange animal she calls Bright Eyes because he pretends to talk in a hilariously convincing way. Taylor tries to demonstrate that he's intelligent and attempts to snatch the pencil from Zyra's hand. At that moment, Dr. Zayas enters. Zyra shows him the exceptional human, but Zayas is skeptical and sees him merely imitating. Zyra tries to draw attention to the human's uniqueness by highlighting his unconventional use of a blanket as clothing and his unusual hand movements. Perhaps he's intelligent, but Zayas is irritated, dismissing it all as cheap tricks. Humans are dangerous and must be destroyed. Later, they bring a female human as a gift and lock her in Taylor's cell. The next day, George and his companion are walking in the yard in a large cage. Zyra brings her fiancé, an archaeologist named Cornelius, to show him Taylor, but Cornelius sees nothing special about him. While the apes argue, George writes in the sand, but nobody pays attention to him. At that moment, Dr. Zayas arrives, annoyed at Zyra with her human again. Suddenly, a wild man attacks George and a fight breaks out. The guards drag Taylor away and Zayas sees the letters George wrote but quickly erases them. Zyra apologizes to Taylor but he snatches the paper and pencil and writes his name on the piece of paper. Zyra is astonished and takes him home. Cornelius doesn't believe her stories, it's all just tricks, humans can't write. They try to figure out where he learned it and Taylor writes the name of his school. The apes are shocked, could he really be intelligent? The man explains that they came from another planet. Cornelius is puzzled, but flying is impossible. Then Taylor crafts a paper airplane. Afterwards, he asks to see the maps and explains where they landed and how they got there. Zyra and Cornelius argue fervently. She claims that humans are a mutation, the missing link between apes and monkeys, and it is quite possible that monkeys evolved from humans. Dr. Zayas, who enters the scene, discovers the paper airplane, crushes it, and orders the man to be taken to a cell. Taylor and Nova sleep in their cell when the arriving apes order Taylor to be prepared for a castration operation, but the man breaks free and runs out of the cell. He manages to hide in the ape temple but is noticed, and the man has to run through the ape city again. Taylor ends up in a museum where stuffed humans are exhibited. Shocked, he runs out into the street but gets caught in a net, where Zyra finds him. And then the voice returns to Taylor, shocking the apes. Later in the cell, Taylor tries to teach Nova how to speak, but the apes take the girl away and put her in the cell across from him. The man tells her about his life on Earth, but he didn't love anyone there. He wonders if Nova can love. The apes put a collar on him and take him to trial. A hearing is now taking place, and Zyra and Cornelius are ready to act as his attorneys. The judges are outraged. He has no rights because he's not an ape. But then what is he being tried for? The court gives a continuance to his lawyers, but Taylor intends to defend himself. A theologian scientist is called to testify, trying to prove the man's irrationality, as he does not know the answers to the simplest questions. But Taylor cannot know them as he has not studied their culture. A person is prohibited from speaking, so he writes his statement and submits it to the court. Cornelius reads that Taylor is a space explorer and arrived from another planet, but the apes do not believe him. They demand to bring the people captured with him. And Taylor sees Landon, but he does not recognize his friend, and the scar is found on his head. George realizes that Dr. Zaius destroyed the man's brain. George is dragged back to the court. And then Cornelius defends Taylor. He did not lie when he said he came from the Forbidden Zone. He described it very accurately, and Cornelius himself was there, and he found traces of ancient ape culture. Zyra continues the defense. If he did not come from another planet, he was born on this one. She found no reason why people cannot speak. The problem is not in anatomy but in the brain, and that is the truth, but nobody wants to listen. Zyra and Cornelius are accused of scientific heresy and the tribunal is closed. The fate of the man is predetermined. He is handed over to Zaius, who intends to perform operations on him. George is outraged. How could such an upside-down civilization arise? And most importantly, why is Zaius so afraid of him? Zyra cannot accept this and organizes the escape of Taylor and Nova. Outside the city, Cornelius meets them with horses and supplies. He suggests returning to the spacecraft landing site. A small caravan sets off and reaches the river. If they follow it, they will reach the sea. Soon they reach the place where Cornelius was excavating. He's ready to take the man to the cave. And then Zyra sees the pursuit. Dr. Zaius, who caught up with the fugitives, is in for an unpleasant surprise. Taylor is armed. The Earthling offers a compromise to the doctor. If Cornelius can prove that their culture is not the oldest and originated from humans, he will leave them alone. Everyone goes into the cave. While Cornelius shows off his findings, Taylor discovers spare parts of a human, a dental plate, glasses, and a heart valve. But the main discovery is a human doll that says the word mama. Zaius tries to find a reasonable explanation when gunshots are heard outside. Everyone rushes to the exit. It's the makeshift doctors who, unable to keep their words, have attacked the fugitives' escorts. Taylor takes Dr. Zaius hostage and orders everyone to leave. Taylor will release him in exchange for a horse, food, and water for him and his woman. But before leaving, he asks the doctor why he always feared him, and he answers because he's a man, and that his ancestors are to blame for the lifeless forbidden lands, for he is the lowest and most treacherous beast. The people leave, and the doctor orders the cave to be blown up and Zyra and Cornelius to be arrested. He saves the future of his people. Taylor and Nova ride along the beach. Suddenly, the man jumps off the horse in horror. He has returned, and they did it after all. They blew them all up and destroyed civilization, let them burn in hell. Nova looks at Taylor in fear. She doesn't understand what is before her, the upper part of the Statue of Liberty rising on the ocean shore. The film is based on the book by French writer Pierre Boulle, who considered his novel one of his least successful works and therefore had serious doubts about its success on the big screen. But in the end, the film ranked 350th on Empire magazine's list of the 500 greatest films. The film takes place in the small town of Wengenberg, where a young girl named Yennefer lives with a skewed face and a disgusting hump in the family of a cowman. Because of her ugly appearance, the girl is constantly mocked by the locals, and one day when Yennefer is once again mocked by a couple of local young men, the girl accidentally opens a portal to the magical Tor Lara in Aretuza, where she's met by the young wizard Istrid. The guy's concerned. All magic leaves traces which wizards can use to find someone who has even an ounce of magic in them. He decides to save the budding sorceress and opens a safe portal that brings Yennefer home. Time later, a beautiful and wealthy lady arrives at the farm of the girl's father to buy a pig. But upon seeing the girl, she expresses a desire to buy her too. And the father, who does not hide his disgust for his daughter, sells her for half the price of the animal despite the pleas of her mother, who recognizes the lady as a witch. So Yennefer finds herself in the magical school of the enchantress Tissaia of Rhys, where several girls are already studying. At first, Yennefer takes the separation from home hard and how low her father judged her. She even tried to commit suicide, but when classes begin, she discovers that the young wizard was right. It was her inadvertent wizardry that caused the wave and caught the attention of the school's rector, the wizardess Tissaia. The girls who study at the school have also distinguished themselves with the same unique skills. Soon Tissaia holds the first test. The girls must lift a stone and a flower without touching them and using a spell. Everyone more or less manages to cope with the task, but Yennefer fails. The girl stubbornly tries again and again until Tissaia stops her. Frustrated, Yennefer runs away. Later, she finds Istrid in the cave and tells him her name. Sometime later, Tissaia trains her female pupils to recognize man's greatest fear. She sees the girls in pairs and orders them to look into each other's eyes until they get inside their rival schemes. Yennefer pairs up to encourage the girl, but she again fails. Tissaia is enraged. Yennefer is useless. And this is because she's lying to herself. Even if she were a beauty, no one would love her. Although she's not the only one to whom she has problems, Yennefer shares the problems with her only friend, Istrid, who talks about her schooling. He too was having a hard time with everything. The boy offers to read his mind, and the girl succeeds. One night, Tissaia wakes the girls in the middle of a storm and takes them to the Tor Lara, the most powerful magic place in the continent, entrance to which is only open to members of the Wizard Brotherhood. Today, there will be a test in the art of controlling the flows of chaos, which requires catching lightning in a bottle. The girls do not believe in such a possibility, and some get strong discharges even after catching the lightning. Yennefer's turn comes, and she reaches up with the bottle, but it is thrown back against the wall. Enraged, she directs her power at her more fortunate opponent, Tissaia, blocking her mental blow. Later, she reprimands her apprentice she almost killed today, which means that her emotions can ruin her own. Tissaia cannot be sure that Yennefer will not go along with her feelings and harm his school, for she's to become a court sorceress, and the weak have no place near a ruler. The enchantress already doubts that there's anything in her that the wizarding chapter needs. Frustrated, Yennefer tells Istrid everything. But most importantly, the enchantress knows all about them and they won't be able to see each other again. The guy is willing to show her other, more ancient and powerful magic, but it is very dangerous. He shows her the skulls of the dead elves who built Aretuza. They were the first wizards of the continent, and they were the ones who built all the magical places. But humans came to the continent and slaughtered them. Istrid gives her a flower that can only grow where the elder blood rests and reads a spell, which by repeating it the girl opens a portal. The astonished wizard does not understand how she managed to do it the first time, and Yennefer confesses that her real father was a half-elf who died in the purge. It was his blood that made her ugly. The boy kisses Yennefer and confesses his love. Later, she shows Tissaia the flower. It turns out that this was her assignment, to get the plant by applying the skills of false emotion. Yennefer hopes to be elevated. The enchantress promises that she will soon hear a knock and know when it is time. Meanwhile, Istrid is also reporting to his mentor Strigobor about what he has learned about the girl. One night, Yennefer hears a knock at her neighbor's door and, taking the flower, goes after them. She peeks out as Tissaia turns the four of them into eels. The enchantress knows the girl is here and orders her to come out and push her former fellow students into the water. They are now the conduits of magic for Aretuza. Yennefer performs this and then sees many silhouettes of former schoolmates in the water. Time passes. Yennefer enjoys a love affair with Istrid, applying what she has learned to enhance the effect of intimacy. Thus, one day she created a whole crowd that watched her intimacy and then rewarded the lovers with applause. The guy is amazed at her imagination. What will she come up with next time? So the day of the final rite is approaching, after which they will be masters of their own destiny. Yennefer dreams of graduating from Aretuza and returning to her native Aedirn as a powerful sorceress to show her longtime abusers and her father what she's been able to achieve. In addition, all Aretusa graduates are perfected before being sent to the different kingdoms. All physical defects are removed, which awaits Yennefer as well. The wizard in charge shows her his work, the flawless beauty of the graduates, and promises her an equally wonderful result. He suggests making her color a noble but strong gray. Tisai, on the other hand, teaches her to look in the mirror and see what Yennefer herself wants. She orders the girl to close her eyes and imagine the most powerful woman in the world. Yennefer complies with the order but does not yet see the promised beauty. Meanwhile, the chapter of wizards gathers in Aretusa to decide where their graduates should go, for all kings need court wizards. Then it transpires that one of the leaders of the council, the wizard Stregobor, knows that Yennefer is a quarter elf, which means that she will not be accepted at Aretusa, where there is a prejudice against elves. The chapter vows to send Yennefer to Nilfgaard, which the aspiring enchanter does not like. She demands an audience with the chapter, but Tisai declares herself in charge of the distribution. Yennefer is beside herself. She has no intention of wasting her life serving the king of a small southern kingdom and a lover of women. The tutor reminds her of the elven blood, and the girl understands how Stregobor knew about it. The initiation ceremony begins, which Yennefer does not attend. Worried, Istrid finds her behind a letter to her father, asking him to confirm that she's his own daughter. The boy does not believe that this letter can convince the chapter. But the girl simply does not know what to do, for even if Istrid disproves his words about her origins, no one will believe him anymore. The enchanter is frustrated. He didn't know why Stregobor needed this information, and she has already missed all the initiation spells. Istrid suggests that she should go with him, for he has been offered to become an explorer. They can travel the continent and discover the unknowable. But unexpectedly, the girl cruelly ridicules his plan. She's not going to dig through the dust of the ages at all, and these are his dreams and intentions, and her opinion, as always, he does not even ask. Istrid is shocked. Yennefer is not at all what he thought she was, and he expresses his opinion that she's angry because she missed her chance to find beauty. But a girl needs power, and she didn't experience so much hardship studying at the magic school for nothing. Yennefer runs to the enchanter, who is in charge of perfection, and demands to show her art. Not even the lack of a potion to dull the terrible pain that accompanies the transformation process stops her. As the magician begins the process, Yennefer asks for her eyes and the cut marks on her hands as a reminder of her former weakness. And the wizard informs her that every magic has a price. Having been reborn, she will not be able to walk. But the girl agrees to everything, even to the removal of her womb necessary for a complete transformation. The magician reads spells, and the girl screams in terrible pain and rips the chains with which she was tied to the table. Her spine straightens, her entire body seems to melt and shift from one form to another. Finally, writhing in pain, Yennefer loses consciousness. Meanwhile, in the main hall of Aretusa, the initiation ball continues. Suddenly, Tisai sees a door opening, in which stands an unusually beautiful girl with violet eyes. She realizes that Yennefer has disobeyed her orders and hurries to take her away. But it is too late. The Aedern ruler has already noticed the beauty. He invites her to a dance where he expresses his desire to see her as court wizard in his kingdom. Tisai has to retreat and only watch the dance of the king and the enchantress from afar. Directed based on a series of books by Sapkowski, The Witcher is quite curious, fascinating, and vivid. The atmosphere of magic, the world of monsters and steel swords transferred quite well, so the adventures of the female protagonist will be even more exciting in the next episodes. The story begins with a gripping and mysterious scenario. Ethan, a Secret Service agent from Seattle, regains consciousness in a forest after a car accident. Sporting a bruised face and feeling disoriented, he manages to make his way through the pine forest and finds himself in the seemingly peaceful town of Wayward Pines, Idaho. His appearance in town draws curious looks from passers-by, and upon entering a restaurant and collapsing from exhaustion, he learns from a waitress where he is. Ethan wakes up in a hospital bed in Wayward Pines, where a nurse named Pam tends to him, explaining he has minor injuries from the car accident. Distressed, Ethan inquires about his partner, Stallings, who was with him during the accident, only to learn of Stallings' tragic death. When he asks for his cell phone and belongings, he's advised they're at the police station, but he's encouraged to rest instead. Despite being the only patient in the hospital and against Pam's advice, Ethan leaves to go go to the police station. There, he finds he can't access his belongings during the day, leading him to a nearby bar. Meanwhile, Ethan's boss Adam informs his wife Teresa that Ethan has been in an accident, but they haven't found his body yet. At the bar, Ethan borrows a phone from a waitress named Beverly to try and contact his family, but fails. Beverly empathizes with his situation, and it gives him her address in case he needs further help. He tells her his identity and that he is looking for two fellow agents, Evans and Kate, who is also Ethan's lover. Later, he notices her note mentioning the absence of crickets in Wayward Pines. On his way to the motel, he hears cricket sounds, but they are coming from a hidden speaker. The next morning, unable to pay for his hotel, Ethan visits Beverly's address only to find an abandoned cabin with the decaying body of Evans inside. Returning to the police station, he encounters an indifferent Sheriff Arnold who denies having Ethan's belongings and is unresponsive about the body. Ethan's attempts to make phone calls again prove fruitless. Back at the bar, Ethan finds a new operator and Beverly's mysterious absence. After an argument, Ethan is knocked unconscious. He wakes up in the hospital once more, this time restrained. Dr. Jenkins, a psychiatrist, insists on performing surgery due to a supposed blood clot despite Ethan's protests. Injected with a sedative, he's left in the operating room. Surprisingly, Beverly rescues him, and together they knock out Pam and they escape the hospital. They reach a secluded wooden house where Beverly shares her own experience. She reveals she arrived in Wayward Pines in 1999, searching for an escape for a year. She also tells him she and Evans tried to escape, but he was killed. As Ethan falls under the sedative, he tells her it is actually 2014 now. Ethan wakes to find Beverly gone. Adam and investigators in Seattle are puzzled by the lack of evidence indicating Ethan's presence in the car during the accident. Meanwhile, in Wayward Pines, Ethan spots Kate, the other missing agent, at a nearby party. She appears older than he remembers, and Ethan cautiously follows her to a house that she enters with a man named Harold. When Ethan confronts Kate, she denies knowing him and warns him about the town's extensive surveillance with cameras and hidden microphones. Shockingly, she reveals she has been living in Wayward Pines for 12 years, leaving Ethan bewildered and alarmed. Determined to escape, Ethan steals a parked car, but his attempt to leave Wayward Pines is unsuccessful as he finds himself inexplicably back in town. Frustrated, he tries to flee on foot, only to be stopped by a massive electrified wall surrounding the town. Sheriff Arnold confronts him for the car theft and dismisses his claims of being a Secret Service agent. The next day, Ethan returns to the cabin where he found his colleague's body, still undisturbed. He discovers a mysterious notebook in his friend's boot, but is interrupted by Arnold, who arrives with a gun, claiming a forensic team is coming. Ethan is forced to leave and heads back to the hotel. At the bar, he unexpectedly encounters Beverly again. She covertly arranges a secret meeting and gives him money, hinting at a plan involving Evans's notebook. Using the money, Ethan visits a cafe and manages to call the Secret Service, only to realize the operator is an imposter. He becomes suspicious when the cashier hastily takes the banknote from him. Later, Ethan tries to connect with Kate at the toy store where she works. Despite his efforts, Kate remains distant and secretive, adhering to the town's strict rules against discussing the past. Ethan's confusion deepens when he visits Evans's home, where Evans's wife denies knowing him and claims she witnessed her husband's suicide. Seeking answers, Ethan confronts Arnold, who instructs him to stay at the hotel and informs him that Evans's body has been sent to the morgue. At the morgue, Ethan retrieves the notebook from Evans's clothes. In a startling turn, Ethan sees his wife, Teresa, and son, Ben, being brought into the hospital on stretchers, but he can't find them anywhere. Dr. Jenkins warns Ethan that his condition is deteriorating and insists he needs surgery immediately. Back in Seattle, Teresa grows increasingly anxious about Ethan's whereabouts, with their son Ben suspecting Ethan might have run away with Kate. When she contacts Adam for information, he assures her of his efforts, but explains that the details are confidential, deepening the mystery and concern for Ethan's fate. The tension escalates as Ethan continues to unravel the mysteries of the town. He meets Beverly at their agreed location in Pine Forest, where she reveals that a tracking device has been implanted in him. Together, they remove the device in a secluded stone house. Beverly also shares the harrowing truth that Sheriff Arnold publicly executed Evans as a warning to the town. Ethan later meets Kate again, and despite his reservations, accepts an invitation to dinner at her house with Beverly. Anticipating surveillance, he cleverly leaves the tracking chip on his hotel bed and sets out to find a package hidden in the pine forest, as indicated by a map inside Evans's belongings. After successfully retrieving the package, Ethan observes Arnold firing a gunshot from a distance at Kate's house. While Beverly nervously remains at the dining table, Ethan searches the bathroom for surveillance devices. Beverly inadvertently mentions her daughter, a violation of the town's strict rules. Realizing her mistake, she excuses herself, leading to a tense situation as all the phones in the town ring simultaneously, signaling their exposure. Ethan and Beverly hastily leave, evading the crowd, now alerted to their actions. In the cemetery, Ethan instructs Beverly to retrieve the agent's package while he draws the crowd away. However, Beverly is captured by the townspeople. Ethan, hiding in a nearby house, witnesses a chilling scene where Beverly is dragged onto a stage before an excited crowd. Arnold incites the crowd to punish Beverly for her attempt to escape, and she is brutally executed in front of the onlookers, including Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan's wife Teresa and their son Ben travel to Idaho to investigate Ethan's disappearance. They arrive at the Secret Service field headquarters in Boise, Idaho, where Ethan was last reported. While there, Teresa uncovers a lead to Wayward Pines. As Teresa and Ben near the town, they are pulled over by Sheriff Pope, who sabotages their car under the guise of fixing an oil leak. The following morning, Ethan stumbles upon a truck loaded with supplies, indicating a connection to the outside world. He hides in the truck's cargo hold, eventually emerging in a well-lit warehouse filled with workers and abandoned vehicles, including one that belongs to his wife, Teresa. Inside Teresa's car, he discovers personal items belonging to her and Ben, adding to his desperation and confusion about his family's whereabouts and safety. The plot takes a dramatic turn as Ethan's situation grows increasingly mysterious. As Ethan explores the warehouse, Sheriff Arnold suddenly appears, attacking him with a sedative. Ethan loses consciousness and later wakes up in a hospital bed. The nurse there informs him that his wife Teresa and son Ben have been brought to Wayward Pines and are now living in Beverly's former house. Despite his disbelief, Ethan goes to visit his family, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension about their safety in the town. He cautions Teresa against wandering or communicating with anyone, even over the phone, aware of the town's oppressive surveillance. Ethan then confronts Arnold and Nurse Pam at the police station, demanding to know why his family was brought to Wayward Pines. Arnold insists it's for their happiness, but Ethan, unconvinced and furious, presses for more answers. Their heated exchange is interrupted by a mysterious phone call, hinting that Arnold is merely a pawn in a larger scheme controlled by an unknown mastermind. Outside the police station, Ethan encounters Dr. Jenkins, who advises him to abandon any thoughts of escape. Ethan, however, firmly states he doesn't belong in Wayward Pines. Seeking more insight, Ethan meets with Kate in the pine forest, away from the prying eyes of surveillance cameras. However, Ben follows his father and witnesses the meeting, prompting him to rush home and inform Teresa. Kate explains to Ethan that after spending 12 years in Wayward Pines, she has resigned herself to the town's rules as the only means of survival. Upon returning home, Ethan is shocked to find his family missing, with only Teresa's wedding ring left behind. Frantically searching for them, he discovers them near the isolation wall, where Arnold is threatening them with a gun. In a tense confrontation, Ethan struggles with Arnold, and Ben intervenes by hitting Arnold with a car. As Arnold lays dying, he cryptically warns Ethan that the truth is far worse than he can imagine. Ethan, taking the key to the isolation wall, opens the gate, only for a strange figure to snatch Arnold's body, accompanied by a creepy noise. Ethan quickly closes the gate and escapes with his family. Back at home, the family is deeply shaken. Ethan advises them to pretend to lead a normal life while they plan their escape. The next day, a mailman delivers a letter to Ben, welcoming him to Wayward Pine Academy, along with a uniform. Ethan, in need of a gun, visits the police station only to encounter the mayor, Brad, who warns him to follow the town's rules and avoid asking questions. Ethan is also congratulated on becoming the new sheriff, complete with a cake and a newspaper announcing Arnold's retirement. Reluctantly, Ethan plays along. Meanwhile, Ben attends Wayward Pine Academy, where he meets his teacher Megan, who is also the mayor's wife and a therapist specializing in molding the children's minds. Ethan, continuing his investigation, discovers hidden files on the town's residents, nudging him to delve deeper into the secrets of Wayward Pines. Soon after, the tension within the town continues to escalate. The residents capture a man named McCall, who is accused of spreading harmful ideas on walls. Nurse Pam pushes for a public execution the following night, but Ethan, now acting as the sheriff, strongly opposes it. In his office, Ethan interrogates McCall, but is interrupted by a phone call, leading him to reluctantly agree to execute McCall the next night. That evening, Ethan's son Ben sneaks out with his school friend Amy, indicating the younger generation's growing curiosity and defiance. Meanwhile, Ethan and Teresa have dinner at a local restaurant with the mayor and his wife Megan, where other town residents, including Pam, Kate, and her husband, are also dining. A celebration for the new sheriff follows, during which Pam takes the opportunity to congratulate Ethan, but also stresses the importance of upholding the town's strict rules. Ethan, feeling the weight of his new role, publicly declares his commitment to rooting out true evil in Wayward Pines. After the dinner, Ethan asks Teresa to return home, while he attempts to secretly help McCall escape from the cell. However, McCall suggests they head towards the isolation wall instead. At a cliff near the wall, McCall reflects on its purpose, whether it's meant to keep the residents in, or something from the outside out. In a moment of desperation, McCall embraces Ethan and then runs into the electrified wall, sacrificing himself in a bid for freedom. Teresa, meanwhile, receives a letter stating she can now work at the Wayward Pines Realty Associates, McCall's previous workplace. Ethan, determined to leave Wayward Pines, packs weapons and successfully climbs the cliff. However, he soon realizes he's being watched by a strange figure. As night falls, a dark shadow attacks him, injuring his arm. Despite firing his gun, Ethan is unable to fend off the swift creature. The next morning, Ethan prepares to navigate the pine forest, hoping to find help from the nearest city. In the town, Ben finds his new school unsettlingly perfect. While Teresa starts her new job at the realty office, she's assigned to assist a new resident, Wayne, who appears confused and disoriented. Sensing a shared experience, Teresa offers her help and discreetly inquires about his past. However, their conversation is interrupted by Pam. Later, Teresa takes Wayne to a house under the guise of giving a tour. Using the noise of a dryer as cover, she warns him about the surveillance in Wayward Pines. She learns from Wayne that he remembers waking up in a chamber, surrounded by others in a similar situation. Meanwhile, Ben and two new students are called to a closed, all-white room for orientation. Megan, the teacher and mayor's wife, begins the session, hinting that they are about to learn the hidden truths of Wayward Pines. Teacher Megan reveals a disturbing image of a hairless, monstrous humanoid creature evolved from humans in a dominant predator known as Abby, short for an aberrant. She explains that these creatures, Abbies, travel in herds, with the lunch break offering the students a brief respite to process this revelation. The session resumes. Each student receives an ancient coin dated 2095, leading teacher Morgan to reveal a startling fact. The current year is not 2014, as they believed, but 4028. She explains that their supposed accidents were actually deliberate selections to bring them to Wayward Pines. The residents, including the students, have been in hibernation chambers for over 2 millennia, chosen by the program's creator, David, who Megan says is always watching over them, though they will never meet him. Ethan, feeling a constant sense of surveillance, ventures into the woods. He cleverly uses an animal carcass to mask his scent and observes the Abbeys. His journey through the pine forest leads him to the ruins of human civilization, confirming teacher Megan's revelations. Unexpectedly, he encounters a helicopter and meets Dr. Jenkins, who reveals himself as David, the architect of Wayward Pines. David urges Ethan to return to town promptly. My friends, the continuation of the story is now on the screen in front of you. After the alien invasion, humanity is forced to hide in underground bunkers. The world leaders of Earth are desperately trying to keep people underground. But there is a soldier who kills one of the enemies and discovers a terrible truth. But they shelter immediately. The nonsense could attack at any moment. 50 years after the attack of something, all of humanity lives underground, although there are those who refuse to descend into the bunkers. An ordinary person can return to the surface only by becoming a soldier and serving the standard term, 100 days. One day, a soldier with the call sign Sum-1 completes his required training and boards a tank to travel to the outpost Cerberus, where he must serve his shift. On the way, the military encounters people running towards the shelter, which is called Exilium. The soldiers disembark one by one as they reach their assigned posts. Finally, it's someone's turn. However, the soldier cannot immediately enter the bunker as the door is jammed, so he climbs the watchtower to contact the command. The soldier undergoes DNA identification and the system congratulates him on the start of his 100-day service. He will have to monitor the territory, track something, and send those who stray into the shelter. The protective ring is in order, there are no breaches, all cameras are functioning, and the power supply is stable. But upon arrival at the post, the soldier does not find the person he was supposed to replace, which is a breach of protocol. The commander reassures someone. The former watchman with the call sign VAC-7 was evacuated for medical reasons. He was called up from the reserves and now he must strictly adhere to all the rules. He must not leave his zone and must be very vigilant because his vigilance is a condition for survival of humanity. They provide him with a daily access code and instruct him on how to enter the bunker through a secret passage, allowing him to go outside for this purpose. Someone begins to settle in. Finally inside, he discovers that the room is neglected and empty. Someone arranges his rations, lights a cigarette, and polishes a glass, listening to the system's reminders to think about the safety of himself and his family. At night, he dreams of laughing children, but the daily alarm clock reminds him of how many days are left until the end of his active service, and someone begins his daily routine. Exercises, showers, territory check, and food from his rations. During lunch, he suddenly hears strange sounds and sees movement in the corner of the room, but doesn't have time to understand what it is. Later, he reports everything to the commander, but the commander reassures him everything is proceeding as usual. At night, someone sees children playing again. In the morning, the routine of the previous day repeats: exercises, shower, food, and the one regulated cigarette. Every day is an exact copy of the previous one. There are 87 days left until the end of his service when someone manages to catch an unknown creature, which turns out to be a white rat. However, the animal escapes without allowing itself to be properly examined. Immediately, there is a report of an attack by something on the refugees, and there is no one left alive. Someone activates the system check, and it reports that the defense lines are not damaged. But the soldier clearly sees movement in the bushes on the monitoring screen and reports it to the commander. The commander dismisses any intrusion and asks not to worry. There are 71 days left until the end of the term. The rat that someone named Doctor is no longer afraid of humans and he feeds it. One day there is an alert about a malfunction in one of the cameras and the soldier goes outside to perform technical maintenance on the security system. He surveys the outpost's territory, fixes the camera, and finds a dead bird hanging from a tree with a token bearing his predecessor's number. Right away, the system alerts him to toxic emissions and the soldier heads towards the bunker. Upon returning to the bunker, he reports everything that happened at the post, including the discovery of the token, to the commander, but all his concerns are quickly dismissed. The commander assures him that Vax 7 simply fell ill and is now in the bunker, recovering. The commander's overly cheerful tone makes him doubt even more. There are 65 days left. The United Nations warns of danger, urging people not to stay on the surface as resistance against something is futile. One day, someone goes out onto the territory once again, and after a warning about toxic emissions, he notices an unfamiliar creature in the depths of the forest that quickly escapes from him. He reports it again, but the defense ring is intact and there is no cause for alarm. Someone decides to investigate the bunker and finds a blood stain on the wall, leading him to suspect that Vax 7 may have shot himself and was never evacuated. The soldier tries to access the video camera recordings from the closet where it happened, but the system denies him access. So someone decides to break into the locker belonging to Vax 7 and discovers a sketchbook and a radio receiver. Among the drawings, he finds a sketch of his own post, Cerberus, and a neighboring post, Graham, sparking his interest. There are 54 days left until the end of his term. Someone increasingly thinks about the neighboring post and one day decides to go to Graham to try to establish contact. However, he finds that he cannot cross the perimeter because an implant in his leg activates pain with any attempt to leave the ring. The audio commands insistently urge him to return to Cerberus. He decides to take a step back and climb a tree, hoping to establish contact by waving his hand and shouting to Graham, but he receives no response. Returning to his post, he reviews the archive files and suddenly he discovers some creature on the internal camera and the electricity goes out. Behind him, the soldier distinctly feels someone's movement, even though the equipment insists that there is no intrusion. Someone rushes outside and even shoots at the bushes, scaring off a bird. He reports the malfunction to the commander, who promises to send a repairman and reminds him of his duty, especially with only 40 days left. Someone tries once again to access the archive but finds it impossible as the data has been lost due to an electrical surge. The next day starts as usual, but suddenly the soldier feels unwell. He takes medication and accidentally cuts his finger when he suddenly hears a cheerful children's song coming from the predecessor's closet. It turns out that Vax 7's radio is turned on and the neighbor from Graham Post is calling out to his old acquaintance. He quickly realizes that it's a different person and cuts the conversation short, despite pleas to talk to him. The electricity surges again and the soldier reminds about the specialist. The commander then tells him about an attack on a post where no one survived, so reaching distant outposts is very risky. Several more days pass. Someone starts going outside more often, and one day he discovers a woman and a child hiding from him in a cave. He tries to convince them to come down to the bunker, but the two of them run away, seemingly more afraid of him than of something. Returning inside, he hears a warning about several lost individuals in danger. However, now the soldier is not sure if they want to be saved. He talks to the rat more and more, telling it about the children in his dreams. It turns out that the ability to dream has become a thing of the past, but he has suddenly acquired it. This is seen as a sign of a mental illness. Someone keeps trying to contact his neighbor, but there is no response. One night, the soldier ventures out into the territory and kills a huge deer, which he dissects and eagerly consumes. He behaves more and more like a wild man, shooting at targets and walking without his helmet. One day, he makes another attempt to contact Graham, sending a signal with a mirror, but still receives no response, which infuriates him. On his way back, he enters a zone of toxic emissions and almost loses consciousness. In a semi-delirious state, he sees the strange creature again, which runs away from him. Regaining his senses, he tries to convey to his neighbor his belief that Vax 7 is likely being held in the forest, but Graham remains silent. There are 14 days left until the end of his shift when a repairman finally arrives at the post. He reports on a recent attack and the deaths of many people. The man is displeased, sensing the presence of the rat. He explains that the soldier's predecessor was friends with the rat, considering it the height of foolishness. The technician dispels someone's fears, explaining that the shadow on the wall is himself due to a system glitch. Strangely, the cameras in the defense ring are turned off, even though the soldier checked them just now. Then the rat climbs onto the table, and upon seeing it, the repairman forcefully shoves it away. The soldier rushes to the motionless rat and pleads with it not to die, which infuriates the repairman even further. The soldier aims his gun at the repairman, ordering him to disable the internal camera and unlock the archive video recordings. The repairman refuses and someone hits him. However, he still can't do anything because the access requires the personal codes of 2 guards. A fight erupts between the 2 men. Someone sustains several injuries but eventually emerges victorious. Afterward, the repairman shares his experience of encountering something. When he was a soldier, his helicopter crashed in the desert. Of all the survivors, only he and his partner remained. The repairman went for help, and when he returned, he found the second soldier without ears. It turns out that something affects people through sound, and the guy cut off his own ears to avoid hearing the horrifying noise. During a sandstorm, they saw a huge shadow circling around them, but they never understood what it was. When he was eventually found, his lungs were filled with sand, and he had an unexplained catheter in his throat. The soldier locks the repairman in the bunker, tends to his wounds, and reports to the commander that everything is in order. Afterward, he figures out that he can access his predecessor's information through his radio. Finally, he manages to open the archive footage, which makes it clear that Vax 7 did indeed go insane due to exhaustion and stress. Someone shares this information with his neighbor. The soldier is overwhelmed with conspiracy theories. He is convinced that the leadership is deceiving the common people by inventing something, as no one has actually seen it. The mission to send people on the ground is a ploy to restrict the consumption of dwindling natural resources while the rich and powerful enjoy the leftovers. He requests a meeting with his neighbor, who reluctantly agrees. There are 7 days left when, upon hearing another system announcement about something attacking, someone flies into a rage and smashes the alarm with the jar into which the rat has just climbed. Realizing that he killed his own friend, he walks outside naked and once again encounters the monstrous creature. Extracting a pair of deer antlers from a tree, he mortally wounds the monster, only to recognize Vax 7 by a tattoo on his neck. He returns to release the repairman and tells him about the conspiracy, convinced that it was his predecessor's tales that drove him mad. But no one will deceive someone anymore because he's no longer afraid. The soldier demands to know where the power can be cut off because he intends to save the people by disabling the defense lines. The repairman is horrified. He will doom humanity, but he obeys the madman. Someone contacts his neighbor and informs him of his decision that he is coming to him. It's time to put an end to the madness that keeps people on the ground and make them free.